In a story brimming with fractured relationships and betrayal, the most explosive moments unveil the raw nature of infidelity and ambition. From workplace romances twisted into power plays to personal selfishness unraveling love, Jerrod's journey takes us through a gripping tale of injustice, heartbreak, and harsh lessons about trust. Jerrod was a puzzling person. He was a skilled metalworker and a talented carpenter. He had also gone to college and became a smart engineer. He could have had a comfortable life if he had put in the effort. Instead, he was living close to poverty. In high school and shortly after, he took almost every welding course he could find and got certified to work with different types of metal. He worked part-time at various fabrication plants to help pay for his college. During summers and school breaks, he also assisted his father in his woodworking shop. Jerrod earned a degree in mechanical engineering from the University of Missouri. He worked in the engineering field for 3 years after graduating. Then, shortly after his third year at work, his life changed dramatically, which his mother believed was for the worse. This is his story. You can decide if his life is good or if he is just getting by. One evening, Jerrod returned to his upscale condo after a hard day. He was feeling extremely angry. For almost a year, he had been facing issues with his supervisor. At first, he and Patricia got along well. She was an attractive woman, and she knew it. They started at the firm just 3 weeks apart and spent their first year sitting next to each other. He remembered how their relationship changed from just co-workers to something more. They would communicate often, helping each other with their work. Sometimes they shared the same project. They managed to work together well, but Jerrod ended up doing most of the work. He had a special talent that made tasks easier for him. Patricia, while competent, didn't put in as much effort as Jerrod wished. She had a way of charming others to get her work done. She won people over with her smiles and kind gestures, and Jerrod was no exception. Patricia loved to flirt. When she and Jerrod interacted, she would often smile at him and occasionally touch him in a playful way. At first, this bothered him, especially since he noticed her doing the same with other men at the office. After they became a couple, he talked to her about it, and she did try to reduce her flirting, but it was still a part of who she was. She couldn't completely stop flirting, just like the Mississippi River can't flow north. Like many office relationships, theirs started with work talks in their cubicles. After becoming friends, they began having business lunches to discuss projects, which later became something they just enjoyed doing together. Soon, they even visited the local bar after work from time to time. Almost 5 months later, Jerrod asked Patricia out on a date, and she happily agreed. Within 3 months, they became an exclusive couple. Jerrod started helping her more with her projects, often putting in extra hours to design parts of her assignments. Patricia showed her appreciation in various ways, and Jerrod was in love. A few months after they became exclusive, Patricia submitted a difficult project ahead of schedule. It included 2 new design ideas. Her manager was thrilled and gave her a great recommendation along with a $1,500 cash bonus. Jerrod felt a bit hurt for 3 reasons. He had done most of the work off the clock, the innovative ideas were originally his, and Patricia had promised to acknowledge his contribution, but didn't. The most painful part was that after the project was submitted, Patricia spent more time with their manager, even having lunches with him and declining Jerrod's invitations. When Jerrod joined them, he felt like he didn't belong. Patricia often made excuses to avoid going out with Jerrod. Sometimes when he visited her apartment, she wouldn't answer the door or seemed to be hiding inside. Then came the day their supervisor retired. The company considered Jerrod, Patricia, and 1 external candidate for the position. For 3 weeks, they went through many interviews and tests to find the best fit. Jerrod did well on the tests and came out on top. Finally, the news arrived. Patricia was promoted to supervisor of their design team. Within a week, she stopped having lunch or going out with Jerrod. When he asked her about their regular dates, she said she couldn't date him anymore because it wouldn't be proper for her to date someone she supervised. Over the next few months, there were several occasions when Patricia took credit for work that Jerrod had done. Jerrod's manager had not helped him when he complained before. Recently, this manager had also started to bother him more. Jerrod had seen Patricia and their married manager together several times at night. They seemed close, laughing and walking with each other. Jerrod realized they were more than just colleagues. About 2 months after Patricia ended things, Jerrod met his new girlfriend, Winona. He was out with friends on a Friday night, visiting a nicer bar than usual when they accidentally bumped into each other. Jerrod was dressed sharply for a business meeting that day, and he thought Winona was just as attractive. At first, she looked angry and made a comment about people being careless. This made Jerrod upset too, since they were both distracted. He noticed she was chatting with a friend while walking, and he had turned quickly to greet someone he knew, which led to their collision. To his relief, after he sincerely apologized and bought her a drink to make up for the spill, they spent the rest of the night together and exchanged phone numbers before leaving. That Monday, Jerrod called Winona to set up a date. Their first date turned into many more. Jerrod liked her so much that he took her to fancy places she enjoyed, instead of his usual spots. This gave her a different idea of who he was, and soon they became a committed couple. Winona began staying over at Jerrod's place more often, bringing many of her things with her. Although she kept an apartment for appearances, they were practically living together, as she only spent a few nights there each week. Jerrod noticed these nights usually fell on Fridays, but he didn't think much of it. Winona often spent those evenings at events with her friends or family, and Jerrod preferred to stay home. After Patricia became a supervisor, Jerrod received a small promotion as the lead man for one of the teams in his department. He was responsible for designing equipment for one of the biggest manufacturers in St. Louis. He had come up with a clever idea and included it in his plans. When the customer accepted his designs and praised his company, Patricia and their manager did not give him credit. Instead, they took his idea and claimed it as their own. The higher-ups were told that the manager had created the idea, and Patricia had made the initial drawings for Jerrod to finish. That afternoon, Jerrod found out that his employer had received a bonus for finishing the last project early. They got the bonus because of the changes Jerrod had added to the plans. The higher-ups decided that this bonus should be shared among those who contributed, but instead of giving him a share, Patricia and the manager were going to split it. When Jerrod confronted them, they claimed that upper management thought they were the right people to get the bonus for their role in the design and getting the customer to agree. Jerrod met with them in the parking lot. After a brief conversation, Patricia had a frustrated look on her face and said, "Look, Jerrod, we know you did most of the drawings, but it was our idea you used. Just let it go. We wouldn't want anything negative to happen, would we?" After glaring at Jerrod for a moment, she and the manager walked away and got into their cars. Jerrod felt like going back inside to talk to his manager's boss right then, but he thought better of it. He decided to wait until the next day when he could be calmer before addressing the issue with someone higher up in the company. Besides, he had a date with Winona that evening, and he didn't want to be late. She had been upset lately, and he was trying to make things better by attending more of her events. Shortly after he got home, Jerrod received another blow to his happiness. While trying to relax with a drink of his favorite whiskey, his cell phone rang. He almost ignored it, but noticed it was his mother calling. His parents rarely called him, and his mother usually did more than his father. She tried to keep in touch and often gave him a hard time if he missed her calls. For his parents, a phone call was typically very important. "Hello, Mom," Jerrod answered. "How are you this evening?" Jerrod heard his mother sniffing, and her voice trembled as she said his name. "Jerrod, your father is gone." Jerrod was working on some equipment for a local farmer this afternoon when there was an explosion. A piece of metal struck him, and his mother, Kelly, broke down crying again. "Are you okay, Mom?" Jerrod asked, then quickly added, "Of course you're not. I'll be there as soon as I can." He stood up from the couch and hurried to his bedroom. As he packed, he kept talking to her. By the time he finished packing and was ready to leave, he had calmed her down enough to end the call. Jerrod rushed out of his building and got into his truck, a nearly new F-250 Super Crew 4X4. He was almost 40 miles west of St. Louis, speeding down the highway and enjoying the sound of the engine when his phone rang again. This call was from his girlfriend, Winona. When he heard the phone, Jerrod frowned. He had forgotten that he promised to take Winona out after he got his mother's call. He had agreed to take her to a society banquet at her parents' country club that evening. She had been looking forward to it and had talked about nothing else for weeks. Now, he realized he was already 15 minutes late to pick her up and knew she would be very upset. They had been arguing lately about their relationship and what was important in their lives. He worried that given the circumstances, he would face her frustration now. His thoughts drifted back to their last argument from 3 weeks ago, and his frustration returned. Their relationship had been strained because of it, and now he would miss her big event. Jerrod knew that their last disagreement was probably more his fault than hers, but he was feeling overwhelmed. Winona could be demanding, that much was clear. When she was happy, being with her was wonderful. She was beautiful and enjoyable to spend time with. But when she was in a bad mood, she expected Jerrod to meet all her needs without considering his feelings. He remembered a night when he had come home upset from work and was not in the mood to cater to her. He just wanted to feel loved, but Winona only wanted him to focus on her. With a heavy heart, Jerrod decided he needed to face both of them. He hoped he could make things right with Winona and still be there for his mother, who needed him. Winona once again did not want to please him, which upset Jerrod. He stopped trying to be intimate with her. No matter how much she urged him, he held back. Her hints became more intense, and eventually, she told him he needed to do it. When he refused, she threatened that if he didn't do what she wanted, he wouldn't get anything from her. Jerrod replied, "That's fine. I'll be with you as soon as you do something for me." "No, you know I don't do that. How can you even ask me to do something that feels wrong? I don't want to be near that part of you. I'm not comfortable with it. Please just do what I want. I really need it tonight." About a week before this, Jerrod had come to realize something about Winona. He felt their relationship was more about control for her. Everything seemed to depend on her. The more he did for her and spent on her, the more she would give him affection. He realized that his happiness didn't seem to matter much to her. That night, he'd finally found the courage to say no to her demands. He tried to connect with her in other ways, kissing and holding her close. He was ready to be intimate, but she pushed him back, saying, "Not until you do what I want." Jerrod shook his head and replied, "That's not happening until you give back." Winona then got up, dressed quickly and stormed out of the room, grumbling the whole way. The last thing Jerrod heard was the door slamming as she left. He didn't see her for 3 days after that argument. As he reflected on all this, his phone rang and he considered calling her back but thought better of it. Just moments later, his phone rang again. With a sigh, he answered. "Hello?" Before he could speak further, Winona snapped, "Where are you, Jerrod? You're late. We should have left 15 minutes ago. It takes half an hour to get to the club. We're missing dinner. Can't you do this right?" "Sorry, Winona. I forgot to tell you," he started. But she interrupted him, shouting, "You forgot? How could you? You're out with those friends again, aren't you?" "No, I'm sorry. I had just gotten home from work when my mother called. She was upset and I forgot to call you. My father passed away today and I am heading home to support my mom. I won't be back until after the funeral. Should I return for you or do you want to come alone?" "What? Jerrod, we planned this for weeks. You could have honored your promise to me and gone home tomorrow. Can you at least make it back in time to take me to the dance? I have to be seen there. What will people think if I don't show up?" "Winona, you know I can't just drop everything and take you to a dance. I need to be with my family right now. My father has died. If you're too busy to come to the funeral, I'll call you in a day or two to let you know when it is, in case you can come." "Don't bother. I can't keep putting my life on hold for you. I'll just go out to the club by myself. I'm really starting to feel tired of your thoughtlessness. We need to think seriously about our relationship. You're never there for me, and it always seems to be about what you want. Now you've left me behind and broken your promise to go home because your mother wants you to. Every time something is important to you, I have to take a back seat. I'm sick of it. My mother was right. I really don't think you're the right person for me. I deserve more than what you've been giving lately." Winona ended the call. Jerrod felt sick as he thought about her words. He shook his head at how insensitive she was being. He remembered what his father had said when he had met Winona once. "She's a bit high maintenance, isn't she? Are you sure you want to be with someone like her? If that's your choice, fine. But you need someone with more depth. You need someone who will support you always. I just don't see that in her. From what I've seen, it seems like it's all about her wants and needs. A man can't have a relationship like that. When you're married, you share those things. I don't see that happening with her. You seem different from that crowd, and she's all about the social scene." Jerrod had been thinking about his father's concerns about Winona for weeks now. This might have been the tipping point. He realized he needed to focus on his family and get through the next few days. He could think about his relationship with Winona after the event. About 30 minutes after she ended the call with Jerrod, Winona marched into the dining room at the country club. This only made her angrier. She realized she hadn't entered the way she wanted the grand entrance that would show everyone she was important. Instead, she was so upset that she couldn't show the calmness she usually had. She walked in with purpose, fully aware of her actions. Finally, she spotted the table where her parents were sitting, the table she and Jerrod were supposed to share with them, and took her seat. She glanced down at her cold meal and frowned. Her mother looked up, worried, and said, "I'm sorry about your food, honey. I thought you would be here on time, so I asked the waiter to wait for you. Where's Jerrod? Why were you both so late?" "Jerrod's not coming, Mom. He chose to go home to see his mother instead of being here with me." "Oh dear, what excuse did he give this time?" Winona shared the news about Jerrod's father's passing. Her father, Peter, looked surprised when she began to complain about Jerrod's insensitivity toward her feelings. He said, "Now, honey, calm down. He couldn't help this. His father passed away. Why aren't you with him, Winona?" Winona stared at her father in disbelief. Taking a deep breath, she replied, "Yes, he could help. There's nothing he can do at home tonight. He won't even get there until almost midnight. He could have brought me here tonight like he promised and gone home tomorrow. We had this planned for weeks, and you know that. And he didn't even call me to let me know he was changing our plans. When I reached out to find out where he was, he said he was so worried about his mother he completely forgot about our date. Honestly, going to that small town he calls home is the last thing I want to do. I wouldn't have gone even if he had remembered to call." Peter looked at Winona in surprise. He couldn't understand how his sweet daughter had grown into someone so self-centered. Just as he was about to tell her to calm down, his wife placed her hand on Winona's arm and said, "We understand, honey. I've always thought he was thoughtless. He should have brought you out tonight. How about we call the waiter and see if he can warm your plate? The night is still young. Maybe one of your old friends will show up, and you can enjoy part of the evening." Peter spent the rest of the night reflecting on his family. He had a few too many drinks as he saw his daughter, and then later his wife, dance with the many flashy men who attended these events. Peter was concerned about how familiar Winona was with one of the young men she was dancing with. It bothered him to see some of the things happening between her and the other dancers, especially since he had hoped Jerrod would marry Winona. As the night went on, Peter felt increasingly uncomfortable with Winona's behavior. After she danced a couple of times, he tried once more to explain his feelings to her about Jerrod. His efforts only made Winona angrier. They watched her dance again, laughing and enjoying herself, while men seemed eager to dance with her. Peter couldn't help but frown at his daughter until Cynthia leaned over and whispered, "Are you just going to sit there all night, or are we going to dance?" Peter saw the frustration in Cynthia's face and pressed his lips together. He realized he now understood where Winona got her attitude. He couldn't believe he hadn't seen this side of Cynthia before. When they married, they both came from working-class families. Peter had gone to college and worked his way up in banking, while Cynthia often wanted more social involvement than he preferred. He usually agreed to attend functions for the sake of keeping peace at home. Now he felt sad, realizing Cynthia seemed to have forgotten her roots. What upset him more was how it had changed their daughter into someone he found self-centered. Peter frowned but held out his hand to Cynthia. She took it and let him lead her to the dance floor. Cynthia smiled and acknowledged people as they walked by. At first, she was stiff and upset during the first dance, but she began to loosen up halfway through the second one. As Peter turned to see what Cynthia was looking at, he noticed Winona with one of her old boyfriends, leaning close to him. Peter muttered, "That girl." Cynthia saw where he was looking, smiled, and said, "Oh, yes." Then she giggled and added, "It didn't take her long to find someone better, did it? I'm happy for her." "Cynthia, how can you think that?" Peter replied. "Jerrod treated Winona wonderfully, and this guy doesn't seem as good. Jerrod is an engineer, while this boy just has a basic degree in general studies. What kind of future does that offer? You need to talk to that girl before it's too late. If you don't, I will." "You won't do that, Peter. I know what's good for Winona, and it's not Mr. Jerrod. He's always off doing something and leaving Winona alone. Tonight is just another example of how he acts. I will do everything I can to help her stay strong. That young man comes from a wealthy family, and Jerrod's dad is just a carpenter. Winona can do much better than the son of a blue-collar worker, even if he is an engineer. That's not true. Have you forgotten what our parents did for work? If you don't talk to her, I will. I'm done with that girl. Cynthia pulled away from Peter and said, "You won't do that. If you say one more word in favor of Jerrod, you will regret it. And no, I haven't forgotten what our parents had to do to make a living. We are better off now, and I won't let Winona lower herself if I can help it." She shot him a glare and walked toward the restrooms, leaving him standing on the dance floor. After she disappeared down the hallway, Peter angrily made his way back to his chair. He finished 2 more drinks while waiting for Cynthia to return. Cynthia finally came back into view. She looked around until she spotted Winona and smiled. Winona was at a table with her old boyfriend. Cynthia joined them for a few moments, gave Winona a gentle kiss on the cheek, stood up, and started toward Peter's table. Halfway across the room, she was stopped by another guest and pulled onto the dance floor. For the next half hour, Cynthia danced with several men without returning to her husband's table. Peter continued to drink and frown at his wife and daughter. Eventually, Cynthia returned to their table. She frowned at Peter and said, "You're drunk. Honestly, I sometimes wonder how I married you. How could you embarrass your daughter by taking Jerrod's side and then embarrass me by drinking in public?" Peter looked up at Cynthia with blurry eyes. "Well, forget you. You're just like her. Or should I say she's just like you? I can't believe I've been married to you for almost 25 years, and I'm just now seeing how selfish you are. You've become a snob. I liked you better when you were just plain Cindy." Peter stood up and stumbled slightly. He looked at Cynthia and said, "I'm going home. If you want to come, let's go." Cynthia watched him sway as he walked away. She was shocked and wondered what had gone wrong that evening. Jerrod wasn't even there, but he had caused trouble. She really resented him for causing problems between her and Peter. It would take her some time to regain control of him if she wasn't careful. Cynthia hurried after Peter, who was upset inside. She found him at the valet parking area. When he saw her coming, the attendant felt relieved. He thought Peter was too drunk to drive and planned to keep his keys. He smiled at Cynthia and handed her the keys. "Looks like you should drive, ma'am. Here are your keys." Cynthia walked angrily to the driver's door while the attendant helped Peter into the passenger seat. After the doors were closed, she whispered, "You've done it again. How could you embarrass me in front of everyone? This night has been terrible." On the day of his father's service, Jerrod received a message from Winona. "My mom and I have taken all my things from your place. The key is on the table. It's over. I can't deal with your unkindness anymore." He was sitting in his favorite chair at his parents' home when he read the message. There were family and friends visiting after the service. His mother noticed him staring at his phone and came over. "It's okay, honey. Call her. I'm sure she didn't mean to upset you the other night." Jerrod looked up at Kelly and silently handed her the phone. His mother gasped and dropped it. She then hugged him tightly. "Oh, I'm so sorry, honey. This is terrible." Jerrod hugged her back and said, "It's fine, Mom. I'm not really surprised. I thought I might have to break up with her when I got home. This just makes it easier. We had been having problems for weeks. Like Dad said when he met her, she needs a lot of attention and is very self-focused. The only things that matter to her are what she wants. I don't think she sees other people as real. I just can't socialize and party like she wants, and I know I don't have the status she expects. It's probably for the best, but it's just another tough moment in a hard week." Over the next week, Jerrod helped his mother start closing his father's business. On Friday, he walked through his father's shop and sat in one of the chairs in the corner, a place his father used to relax. He called it his man cave. His dad would sit there during breaks or when friends or customers came in. In the winter, they would gather around the wood stove, and in the summer, they faced the sliding doors to the backyard of Jerrod's childhood home. The wood shop was at the back in a separate room, kept clean for work, and there was another room for finishing the wood. As Jerrod looked around the business, he felt a wave of nostalgia. He had gained a lot of knowledge while helping his father. They shared many happy moments together. His father was mainly a cabinet maker, and his workshop had the newest equipment. At one point, he had 20 people working for him. As he got older, he reduced his work and went into semi-retirement, only working enough to help with his income. His father had started as a welder and occasionally helped friends and neighbors until he passed away. He would only do welding for a friend in emergencies, but sadly, that's how he lost his life. Jerrod learned both trades from his father and once thought about running the cabinet shop or being a freelance welder and machinist. However, his interest in machines pulled him away from those initial plans. Jerrod chose to finish his father's last project in the cabinet shop before going back to his job. He called his boss to request a few more days off. The boss replied, "No, you've already been gone longer than we can manage. We need you back here early tomorrow morning. I've scheduled mandatory Saturday overtime to cover for your absence. You'll need to work extra hours until you're caught up." "I really need more time," Jerrod explained. "If I don't finish this job, my mother may have to hire someone else and could pay extra fees. I believe I can complete it in a week or 10 days. "Tomorrow, Jerrod," Patricia said before hanging up. Jerrod stared at his phone, feeling his frustration rising. He tossed it onto his desk in the small office. Then he started up his laptop and opened a word processing program. For the next hour, he wrote and polished a strong resignation letter. Once he was satisfied, he connected to the internet and prepared to send the letter. He added it as an attachment and sent it to the company's president, the personnel office, and Patricia, his manager. In the letter, he not only resigned, but also explained why, mentioning instances where his ideas had been taken by Patricia, who was once his girlfriend. Jerrod sent the email at 6:30 p.m., not expecting much to happen until the next morning. But at 6:40 p.m., his phone rang. It was the company president. After some friendly greetings, they talked about his resignation and the concerns Jerrod had shared about his two bosses. "Jerrod, I'll look into your complaints and see what I can do. I don't want to lose your skills. Are you sure there's no way I can convince you to stay?" "No, sir. I'm sorry, but this is the final issue for me. I'm not the only one who is treated like this. Many of your mid-level managers treat employees poorly. I was thinking of leaving soon anyway, but after how I was treated when I asked for more time off to help my mother, I can't stay there any longer. I'm sorry. I will come in to finish the paperwork in a couple of weeks at most. I think I'll stay here and help Mom for a while before I look for another job." Jerrod's mother was upset when she learned he had resigned for her sake. "Well, Mom, it's too late to change things now, but I was going to leave eventually. I'll get you updated, and then I'll find something else." Instead of finishing the cabinets right away, Jerrod decided to return to St. Louis to complete his resignation paperwork. That evening, after finishing his paperwork, he slumped in his favorite chair with a drink, looking around at the mess left behind. He felt anger rising again. "Forget this," he muttered. Jerrod went to the business office of the condo association. Misty, the office worker, looked up and smiled at him. "Good afternoon, Jerrod. How can I help you today?" "I want to sell my place, Misty. I'm moving back home to help my mom. Dad passed away a couple of weeks ago, and I've had enough of the city. I need to sell the condo. Do you know any good agencies?" "Oh, I'm so sorry, Jerrod. We will really miss you." She searched through her desk and took out a folder, then handed some papers to Jerrod. "Here's information on 3 agencies that we work with. Any of them would be good, or you can choose another if you prefer." "Which one would you suggest?" Misty looked at Jerrod and replied, "I can't recommend anyone. I'm sorry." She took the papers back from him, shuffled them a bit, and then handed them back with a new one on top. "I'm sure you can find the best one if you look closely." She smiled and leaned back in her chair. Jerrod smiled back and said, "Thanks, Misty. I appreciate your help. I'll miss you too. You've always been great to work with." Misty sighed as she watched Jerrod walk out of her office. She thought, why do all the good ones have to leave? A few weeks later, Jerrod finished cleaning his spray gun and returned it to its place. He admired his latest project with pride. He then walked over to the dolly with the new bookcases and carefully pushed them into his drying room. After finishing that task, he walked tiredly out of the wood shop toward his mother's house. It had been almost 4 months since his father passed away. Jerrod was adjusting well to his new life. He still missed his engineering job sometimes, but he didn't miss the stress or the difficult people he had worked with. His mother had completely handed the business over to him. Jerrod still lived with his mother, but was thinking about getting his own place. He carefully locked the door to his shop and walked toward the house, noticing more lights on than usual. When he entered the kitchen, he heard many female voices laughing and talking loudly in the living room. Oh no, he thought. He had forgotten that his mother was hosting her support group for those who had lost loved ones. A few new members had come by, and they were all gathered in the room. Jerrod had nothing against the group. In fact, he thought it was a good idea. He just felt upset that he had forgotten about it. He had been looking forward to unwinding with a drink and relaxing that evening. This made him want his own space even more. He wasn't happy about having to walk through the living room to reach the bathroom he used. He was covered in wood dust and smelled like varnish from his work. Even though he worked with his hands now, he still worried about looking dirty in front of others. The chatter quieted down a lot when Jerrod walked into view. His mother looked up and smiled. "Girls," she said, "this is my son Jerrod. When his father passed away, he left his job in St. Louis and came back home to take over the business. He has been a big help to me, just like all of you." Kelly pulled Jerrod further into the room and introduced him to all the women. He recognized a couple of them from seeing them around town. As quickly as he could, he made an excuse and escaped to take a shower. A little later, he was in his room sipping on his drink when his mother came to find him. She insisted he return to the living room for some snacks since he hadn't eaten yet. Jerrod spent over an hour with the women, chatting and surprisingly laughing a bit at their stories. He also felt some sadness as they shared memories of their loved ones and talked about how their loss affected them. Not all of the women were widows. Some had lost children or other loved ones and needed support. One woman in particular caught his attention. She looked frail and weary, as if she were struggling both physically and emotionally. After spending time with everyone, Jerrod finally excused himself, saying he was tired. He went back to his room and tried to sleep. Eventually, around 11 p.m., the noise either quieted down, or he became so tired that he fell asleep despite the chatter. The next morning, Jerrod and his mother were having coffee on the patio when he asked about Gail, the woman who had caught his eye. "Son, Gail has been through so much," his mother said. "She lost her little 4-year-old daughter and both her parents on the same day in an accident. Before that, she worked part-time at McDonald's and lived with her parents. She had left a decent job in town to come back home and help care for her father. He was starting to show signs of Alzheimer's, which had become too much for her mother to handle alone. They owned their home. Well, it was hers now, on the south side of town. Her parents had been trying to live on their Social Security, but sadly, the house had become quite run down. Fortunately, they had some life insurance, and Gail received that, but she still didn't have a great job. We all wanted to help her, but she refused money and many of our other offers. We felt helpless." A few mornings later, Jerrod was in the local cafe for coffee and to catch up with friends and neighbors. He was like many others in small-town America. Jerrod visited the cafe often for coffee and a bit of gossip. He asked several men about Gail and where she lived. Everyone knew her, but no one had specific information. She had always kept to herself, even before her family passed away. They did mention that a lawyer had convinced her to file a lawsuit related to the accident. Opinions varied on whether the case had merit. Many thought she could receive some settlement, even if it was just to resolve the lawsuit. The accident involved some local high school students driving carelessly after classes. They sped out of the parking lot just as Gail's mother was about to enter the driveway. Her mother lost control of their small car, which ended up in a ditch and crashed into a tree. Sadly, all 3 people in the vehicle died at the scene. After coffee, Jerrod drove by the old house where Gail lived. His mother was right. It was in very bad shape. A few windows were broken, covered with plywood. The yard was unkempt, and some shingles were missing from the roof. Jerrod felt troubled seeing it. He knew others lived in worse conditions, but for some reason, this situation touched him deeply. He decided he would try to help a little. Jerrod remembered some old windows and extra lumber he had stored in his shop. He also thought there were some shingles there. He turned his truck toward home to gather what he could for Gail. He loaded up the shingles and brought his tools back to her house. When he arrived, no one was home, so he decided to replace the missing shingles. The color didn't exactly match, but it was better than leaving the roof without any covering. The roof really needed a full replacement, but he hoped his repairs would solve the worst of the issues for a year or two. Jerrod was finishing up his work as the sun began to set when Gail pulled up in her old car. It looked like it had seen better days and sounded like it was struggling. He didn't see any part of the car that wasn't damaged. The way the Mustang sounded, he was surprised it could even drive at all. "Jerrod," she said, "what are you doing on my roof?" "Well, Gail, I heard you were having some issues with your house. I had some old shingles and other materials in my shop, so I thought I could help you out a bit." "Did I give you permission to touch my house?" "No. I don't think so. Why do you think you can just start working on it without asking me?" "I'm sorry if I upset you. I knocked on your door, but you weren't home. I just replaced a few shingles. You need help, and I can offer it. Can you please just let me assist you? I can also fix some windows and do other repairs if you allow me. I'm not going to charge you anything if that's your concern." Jerrod and Gail went back and forth for several minutes. She insisted that she wouldn't accept his help. Finally, he said, "Okay, I understand. I had a part-time helper, but he quit the other day. How about if you help me in my shop and I'll take care of some repairs in your house? It could be a fair trade." "All right, Jerrod, I do need assistance. If I can help in return, that sounds reasonable, but I want to make sure my work covers all the costs. That's the only way I'll agree to this." Over the next 3 weeks, Gail worked part-time with Jerrod. She kept her job at McDonald's and coordinated both jobs around her schedule. There wasn't much time for her to help with her house since she was working 30 hours a week at McDonald's and over 20 with Jerrod. Often, Jerrod would go to her house and do some work without her. When his mom's support group learned what he was doing for Gail, many of them showed up to lend a hand. They fixed outdoor woodwork, replaced window glass, and even one window entirely. They repaired damage inside, updated some plumbing fixtures, and then painted. Gail's house was given a fresh coat of paint inside and out. Their final task was to clean up and mow the yard. On the day the projects were finished, Gail came home to find the entire support group at her house. Many local business people who had helped with time or materials were there too. When she saw her friends and walked through the house with them, she couldn't hold back her emotions. Tears streamed down her face, and to his surprise, she hugged Jerrod tightly, resting her head on his shoulder as she cried. Eventually, the gathering came to an end, and her friends left. Jerrod was the last to go. As he headed for the door, Gail grabbed his arm and turned him back to her. Gail wrapped her arms around Jerrod and gave him a warm kiss. Jerrod felt a rush of feelings as she looked into his eyes. Her eyes shone with unshed tears. "Thank you so much, Jerrod. Now I have a safe place to live. I'm sorry for the trouble I caused at first. I truly appreciate your help." Gail smiled and added, "I've kept track of the time you've spent here and the things you've shared with me. I plan to work with you until I can repay everything you've helped me with." She gave him another quick kiss and playfully urged him toward the door. "Now you should go home. We have a lot to do tomorrow." Over the next 2 months, Gail became very important to Jerrod. She was naturally good at woodworking, and he could see a future where she was just as skilled, if not better, than he was. He also found her to be a fascinating and charming person. At first, they would share quick kisses when they greeted each other or said goodbye. As they worked together, their hugs and kisses grew longer. Jerrod invited Gail out for meals on weekends, and they started going to local clubs for drinks and dancing. Jerrod began spending some nights at Gail's home. The first time he stayed there, he slept on the couch because he had too much to drink. One night, after finishing a big project together, their friendly kisses turned into something deeper. They shared a cozy night together for the first time. In the following weeks, Jerrod found himself spending almost every night at Gail's. They grew closer, and he started to wonder if they were truly in love. Gail was only 7 years older than him. It could work, right? He told her he loved her. She smiled, gently touched his cheek, and gave him a soft kiss. "Jerrod, sweetie, I care for you a lot. It might turn into love, but I worry it wouldn't last. I can't have children. I had health issues after my first child." Jerrod felt hurt but promised himself he wouldn't lose another woman. He had already experienced enough heartache. He decided to give her space, but he was determined to win her heart. Gradually, Gail warmed up to him again, but she didn't let him stay every night anymore. They shifted to being friends with benefits. Even when she seemed a bit distant, Jerrod remained hopeful. Jerrod felt uneasy when he heard rumors about Gail being seen with another man. When he asked her, she blushed. "I'm sorry you found out like that, Jerrod. A very good friend of mine moved back to town a while ago." He looked at me, and I have been seeing him now and then. "He is just a friend, Jerrod, but we were once quite close. I really like him, Jerrod, and I want to keep seeing him like I do with you. I have been trying to find a way to tell you for 3 weeks, but I was scared. I didn't want to hurt you like those other women did, and that would really upset me." Jerrod felt hurt when Gail confirmed the rumors. However, he still held on to some hope because Gail saw him several nights a week, and they still enjoyed moments together occasionally. He thought maybe he still had a chance with her, even though she said she didn't believe they could be a couple. Gail seemed content with the situation, and Jerrod decided to accept it a while longer before he tried again to be more serious with her. One evening after work, Gail asked if they could sit and talk in the break area before she left. She seemed nervous and a bit scared. Jerrod wondered what she meant by wanting to talk before she went. He had offered to take her out for dinner since it was Friday, and they usually went out together on Fridays. As they talked about the day's work, Jerrod heard a car door close. Then the door to the shop opened. A man he had seen visiting with Gail sometimes walked in. Gail glanced at Jerrod, then quickly went to the man. She gave him a warm hug and a quick peck on the cheek. Gail turned back to Jerrod, now with her arm around the man. She looked even more nervous this time. Taking a deep breath, she said, "Jerrod, we need to talk. I know you think you love me, but I don't feel the same way for you. I do like you a lot and have enjoyed our time together, but I need more, and so do you. Perry and I have been seeing each other on and off for several years. He was away for some time after you moved back. I spoke to him on the phone occasionally, but we weren't together then. Perry returned to town about 3 months ago, and we got back together. He asked me to marry him, and I said yes. I love him more than any man I've ever known, and he says he loves me too. I just couldn't leave without talking to you in person. Jerrod, I know you may feel hurt like before, but I had to do this. I needed to follow my heart. Everyone deserves to be happy and loved, and Perry gives that to me. I'm willing to leave if that's what you want, but we really hope I can still work here with you and be friends." Gail smiled and looked up at Perry, resting her hand on his chest, then turned back to Jerrod. "I just don't want that closeness in our friendship anymore. I'm sorry, Jerrod." Jerrod sank back into his chair, feeling empty and hurt. But strangely, the anger he had felt from past relationships didn't come. He wondered about that for a moment. Then a thought crossed his mind. Jerrod knew that Gail wasn't right for him. He had never felt a romantic spark with her. At first, there was sympathy and then some affection, but it wasn't the type of love one feels for a partner. It was more like the love for a close friend. They had turned to each other because they were lonely, using each other for comfort, but they didn't share a true bond in other important ways. He looked at Perry and Gail, forcing a weak smile. "I know, Gail. I'm sorry too. I think deep down we knew it wouldn't work. I care about you and I know you care about me, but not like that. I would appreciate it if you continue working with me, and I promise I won't bother you about it." Jerrod managed a slightly warmer smile and added, "I'll admit I'm a little sad, and I will miss our time together, but I understand." Turning to Perry, he said, "Perry, I hope you see how special Gail is. Please look past our history and let her keep working here. She has a real gift for this job, and I believe she can succeed if she keeps trying. Please take care of her now." Within a week, everyone knew that Jerrod and Gail were no longer together, and she was with Perry. Jerrod faced some teasing around town, but mostly it was lighthearted, especially since he seemed genuinely happy for them. One morning, Doris, a woman in her early 60s, joined him at his table. Jerrod had chatted with her before as she was a regular at the cafe, but he didn't know her well. After some light gossip, she said, "Jerrod, I know you make cabinets and furniture. I have a problem I'd like your help with. I have some cabinets from your father that need fixing. I could buy new ones, but I like these because my husband worked hard on the wood. Could you help me repair them?" "Doris, if it were any wood but walnut, I would suggest replacing them. That wood is quite expensive, so it might not make sense to repair them. I don't usually take on projects like that, but I can at least check it out." Jerrod set a time to visit Doris's house to see what needed to be done. She lived in an old house near Gail's. Her place needed some paint and outdoor work, but the garden was tidy with beautiful flowers. When Jerrod entered her home, he was surprised. It was spotless and filled with solid wood furniture. The paint was worn, and the carpets were a bit old, but everything was clean and well cared for. The kitchen had old appliances, but it was sparkling clean. He noticed the faucets were dripping in the sink. The back screen door was sagging a bit, and the screen was rusty. He looked at the cabinets with sadness. Some of the doors were damaged, and much of the finish was worn away. They needed new countertops. The old formica was scratched and worn in many places. A couple of the doors had come unglued. "Doris, I think I can fix everything, but I can't give you a clear estimate on the cost. I can charge you by the hour and add the cost of materials. I can also give you the exact cost for new hardware and a countertop if that would be helpful." "I don't care, Jerrod. These cabinets are very important to me. I'll find the money somehow, but I have to fix them. My husband gave them to me when we struggled to get by, and I don't want to lose them. They are one of the few things I have left from him. I may not have a lot of money, but I will pay whatever it takes. If you're willing, could I do some of the work myself? I would need you to guide me, but I would really like to save money by doing it myself." Doris smiled gently as she remembered the past. "I helped him build these," she said. "We cut the wood from the forest ourselves. I helped him load it and take it to the sawmill, too. We had to cut 3 times more wood than we needed because the mill took a third for their work. Your father took another third to build the cabinets for us. I always thought he should have taken more, but that was his choice. My Samuel helped, and he said that was enough. I loved that man dearly. Sometimes he would go without so I could have something I wanted. I really miss him sometimes." Jerrod felt a deep sympathy for Doris. Seeing and listening to her made him realize how well she and her husband matched. He now understood that the 3 women he thought were the one were not. He hoped to find someone special one day, just like Doris and his mother had. He looked more closely at the cabinets and explained to Doris what she needed to do to get started. He helped her take off the doors and told her what supplies to buy to remove the old finish. He advised her to keep the windows open to let out any fumes when she worked on the cabinets and suggested using a fan for better air circulation. After she stripped the doors that needed repair, he took them to his shop for the necessary work. Several times when Jerrod visited to check on the progress, Doris was very warm towards him. He wasn't sure how to respond. He didn't want to hurt her feelings, but he sensed that her gestures were a little too close for comfort. Jerrod had always found Doris to be a little different. She was outgoing, confident, and not shy about being playful. She would often greet him with warm hugs when he left her house, and her friendliness sometimes caught him off guard. Doris had a habit of wearing loose, casual clothes that matched her lively personality, and she seemed to enjoy being the center of attention. One evening, Jerrod went to Doris's house to install a new countertop. It was a big job, and he knew it would take a few hours. Doris, as usual, was eager to help, though her efforts didn't always seem practical. She was chatty and kept hovering near him while he worked, making it hard to focus. At one point, Jerrod was on his back under the sink, securing it to the new countertop. Doris stood nearby, offering to steady the sink for him. Though her timing was helpful, her presence made Jerrod feel self-conscious. She stood close and leaned forward, clearly trying to be involved, though her approach was a bit distracting. "How's that, Jerrod? Am I holding it steady enough?" she asked with a grin. Jerrod nodded quickly, avoiding her gaze. "Yeah, that works, Doris. Thanks." Once the sink was in place, Jerrod started working on the plumbing. Doris crouched down nearby to watch him work, keeping up a steady stream of conversation. He could feel her eyes on him the entire time, and it made him work a little faster than usual. She didn't seem in any rush to leave, and her close proximity made things awkward. Eventually, Jerrod finished the job and pushed himself out from under the sink. "All done," he said, brushing off his hands. "Could you step back so I can stand up?" Doris smiled and held out her hand to help him up. Her enthusiasm was genuine, and though Jerrod felt flustered, he took her hand and got to his feet. Doris gave him a quick hug, as was her habit, and smiled warmly. "You're always so helpful, Jerrod," she said with a laugh. "Thanks for getting this done so quickly." Jerrod smiled politely, packed up his tools, and made his way to the door, feeling a mix of relief and exhaustion. Doris's friendly energy was certainly memorable, but he was ready to get home and call it a day. Jerrod stood frozen, unsure of what to do as Doris stepped closer, her demeanor full of confidence and intent. She reached for his hands, guiding him toward her. Her actions caught him off guard, and he gently stepped back, unsure of how to respond. "Doris, I think we're misunderstanding each other," he said, keeping his tone calm and polite. Doris smiled softly, but looked a little embarrassed. She stepped back, realizing his discomfort. "I'm sorry, Jerrod. I didn't mean to make things awkward. I guess I got carried away." Jerrod nodded, trying to ease the tension. "It's okay. Let's just focus on getting this project done, all right?" They shifted their focus back to the task at hand, the room quiet except for the sounds of tools and the occasional exchange of words about the countertop installation. The air between them eventually settled, and Doris apologized again before he packed up his tools and prepared to leave. As Jerrod walked to the door, Doris called out, her voice softer this time. "Thanks for all your help, Jerrod. I really do appreciate it." He turned back and gave her a small smile. "No problem, Doris. Take care." With that, he left, relieved to put the evening behind him and eager to move on from the unexpected turn of events. He adjusted himself slightly and leaned forward again. He felt a connection with Doris. She smiled up at him. Jerrod moved steadily, and their bodies came closer together. Doris responded and moved her hips towards him. Jerrod pulled back a bit, and they both moved together. This brought them completely closer, and they felt that closeness. Jerrod moved his hips in a gentle motion as he focused on Doris. She smiled again and pulled him closer. She whispered, "Thank you, Jerrod. That feels so nice." Jerrod pulled back and then moved forward slowly. He kept this gentle pace until Doris held on to him and urged him to go faster. "Please, I want more. Let's speed things up, Jerrod." Jerrod began to move quicker and more confidently. The old bed creaked in rhythm with their movements. Doris exclaimed in excitement and held on to him tightly. She moved her hips quickly, then stopped, resting against Jerrod. He felt the joy and warmth building between them. That feeling swept over him as well, and he experienced a wave of happiness. Jerrod leaned down and gave her a soft kiss. He then pushed himself up and rolled to the side to lie beside her. Doris turned toward him, draping an arm and a leg over him. She rested her head on his shoulder, and they both peacefully drifted off to sleep. Jerrod woke later that evening. He gently stirred Doris when he tried to get up. Doris lay in bed, watching him get dressed. Tears filled her eyes. "Thank you, Jerrod. I'm sorry if I overstepped. Please forgive me for wanting some affection like I used to have. You know, as we get older, we don't always receive as much love as we need. Many of us feel lonely after losing our partners. While older women might not need the same kind of attention as younger ones, we still long for connection. Some of us seek companionship, some desire love, and some want both. We just need a caring partner sometimes. I hope you don't think too poorly of me. If you don't want to see me again, I will understand. That's why I waited until you just had the doors left to hang before I approached you. I can manage the doors if you prefer." Jerrod smiled and replied, "No, Doris. I'll take care of the doors for you too." He leaned down and gave her a gentle kiss on the forehead, then stood. He looked at her and said, "I'm not sure what to say. I'll come back in a day or two to finish up if that's all right." Doris watched Jerrod as he walked out of the room. She brought her hand down and felt the warmth of her emotions. A smile formed on her face as she recalled the past evening. She experienced a rush of happiness that reminded her of moments from long ago, even before her husband had passed away. Young Jerrod was full of life compared to the older men she had met at the senior center dances. He had an energy and enthusiasm that she missed. 3 evenings later, Jerrod arrived with the cabinet doors. They worked together to hang them, and during the close task, Doris accidentally brushed against him several times. She felt a spark of excitement, simple and light, in their interaction. A few times she caught Jerrod glancing at her, making her heart flutter. After they finished, Jerrod stood close to her. He smiled, and Doris felt a warm sensation reminiscent of her younger days. She thought he was interested in her, and feeling bold, she reached out and gently touched his arm. The way he responded, looking her way, filled her with understanding. Doris smiled and took his hand, leading him into her bedroom where they shared quiet moments resembling their first time together. Now, nearly every time Jerrod went to the cafe for coffee, Doris joined him. They chatted, but others often wondered if their connection was deeper. Some of the men knew Doris's history and found it hard to believe that someone as young as Jerrod would be close to her. A few friends of Doris began sitting with them, too. One day, as Jerrod was about to leave, Edwina, one of Doris's friends, touched his arm and said, "Jerrod, Doris has mentioned all the help you've given her. Would you mind coming to my house tonight to help me with a little problem?" "Well, I don't usually help at people's homes. I'm not a handyman. What do you need?" he asked. Edwina looked shy and said, "I have a small plumbing issue, and Doris thought you could assist me. Please? She said you did a great job on her faucet." "Look, Edwina, I'm not a plumber. Maybe you should call a professional," he replied. "I know, but Doris mentioned you were able to fix her problem, and mine is much smaller. Can you just come over so we can discuss it?" After some hesitation, Jerrod agreed to visit Edwina that evening. When he arrived, she greeted him at the door in a simple outfit that revealed more than it concealed. He started to excuse himself, but she kindly pulled him inside, closing the door behind them. She stepped into his embrace and gave him a warm hug, followed by a gentle kiss. Jerrod stood in surprise and tried to step back. Edwina held on to him firmly and said, "Please, Jerrod, Doris said you were okay with helping her, and I need that too. I'm too old for games. I need to be cared for by a man just like Doris is. I'm a bit younger than her, and I believe we can be good together too. I won't beg you, but could you please show me some love? I don't need a lot of time. A couple of times a month would make me happy." As she spoke, Edwina leaned closer to him, showing her intentions. Jerrod felt unsure about how to say no without hurting her feelings. He noticed his body reacting to her presence despite his worry. When he didn't pull back, Edwina smiled and led him toward her room. That evening was quite similar to the times he had spent with Doris. Jerrod would see Doris about once a week or every 10 days. She always said that was enough. Sometimes he visited her just for a chat, making sure neighbors didn't suspect anything unusual. Edwina seemed even more grateful for his company than Doris was. She was more spontaneous, and he found her very appealing. When she felt passionate, she expressed herself openly. Edwina even shed a few tears when Jerrod insisted on leaving around 11 o'clock, asking him to come back soon. The next morning, Gail noticed something was off with Jerrod as soon as she arrived at work. Several times, she saw him lost in thought instead of working. During a break, she found him sitting quietly, looking out into the yard. Gail settled down nearby and said, "Jerrod, what's bothering you? You've seemed off for a couple of weeks, but today you seem really different. If there's a problem, maybe I can help. You've helped me a lot, and I'd like to return the favor." Jerrod chuckled softly, then sighed. "I doubt you can help me with this problem, Gail. I honestly don't know what to do now." "Well, if I can't help, I can call Perry. I'm sure he'd be glad to help you after everything you've done for us. We're friends and we want to support you." Jerrod suddenly laughed heartily at that, which made Gail stand up in frustration. "You've got to be kidding me. I try to offer help, and all you do is laugh. Fine then. I'm sorry I cared." She started to walk away, but Jerrod quickly regained his composure and grabbed her arm, saying, "Wait. Please, Gail. I wasn't making fun of your offer to help. I'm sorry." Suddenly he laughed again and added, "Or maybe I am. But I think you really don't want Perry to help me with my problem. Please, sit down. I'll explain it to you, and maybe you can suggest something." Jerrod took a few minutes to tell Gail about what happened with Doris and Edwina. Then he asked, "So if you're still willing to let Perry help me, when can I expect him?" Gail laughed. "How about never? I'm really sorry I offered for him to help you. It's not going to happen." Just then, Perry walked into the building. He often came by to take Gail to lunch around this time. He looked at them and said, "Whoa, what's going on? If Jerrod needs my help, of course I'll help him. How could you say I wouldn't?" Jerrod glanced at Perry, then at Gail's surprised face, and burst into laughter again. Perry looked confused until they stopped laughing. Finally, he asked, "Okay, can someone tell me what's so funny?" Jerrod was still chuckling as he told Perry about his situation. Perry just stared at him, surprised, looking over at Gail for clues to whether Jerrod was serious. When Jerrod finished, Perry said, "I can't believe it. Doris and Edwina really are interested in you? And Francis, too?" He laughed and added, "Oh, this is just too funny. Jerrod, the ladies' man. Sorry, but I can't help you with this one." Perry and Gale exchanged glances, occasionally stifling their laughter. Finally, Perry looked at Gale and shook his head. He turned to Jerrod and said, "You know, I don't really see a big issue here as long as you're careful. None of you are committed to anyone. Everyone knows the older women at the senior center are looking for company. There are many more single women than men. Why not just continue as you are? Everyone is happy and nobody gets hurt. It sounds like a good deal to me." Gale looked at Perry, shocked, and exclaimed, "Perry, you can't be serious." Perry held his lower lip and said, "Well, isn't there really much difference between those women and you? You and Jerrod were doing the same thing until we got back together." He noticed Gale's expression change and raised a hand to calm her. "Look, I'm not criticizing or judging. I know you were free to do that. We weren't a couple, and you two were. All I'm saying is they have the same right to do things as you or any other single woman does. I guess they do, but they are so much older, and besides, he's with all of them at once." Jerrod jumped in and said, "Wait, Gale. I am not with them all at once. I have never been with a woman when anyone else was in the room. Sometimes there can be almost a week between my time with each of them, and we are always alone together." The three friends talked more about it and agreed that unless the women grew jealous or Jerrod found a younger woman he wanted to date, he had no reason to turn down their company unless it bothered him. Jerrod then lightened up and smiled at his friends. "Okay, I guess I understand this now. I still feel a bit strange, but whatever. At least we all have some fun now and then. And Edwina was right about one thing: we all need affection from time to time." Jerrod stood and returned to the shop. He looked tall and happy again. Gale was glad he felt better, but she still had a nagging doubt about Perry's suggestion for Jerrod to continue seeing the older women. Over the next year, Jerrod added 2 more women to his circle. There were Doris, Edwina, Frances, and Hope. Hope was the youngest of the group at just 49, and she was probably his favorite. He often spent Friday nights with her, and sometimes Saturday nights too. One Sunday morning in January, after Jerrod had been helping his lady friends for a few months, his mother asked, "Jerrod, could we stay home this morning and have breakfast instead of going to the cafe like we usually do?" "Sure, Mom. Don't you feel well? I thought you liked going out for meals on Sunday mornings before church. Is something wrong?" "No, I don't think so, but I really wanted to talk to you, and I didn't want anyone to overhear. I've been trying to talk to you for almost a month, but you are always busy, or the timing is off. I just wanted a nice breakfast with you and some quiet conversation if you don't mind." Jerrod helped his mother prepare breakfast, his favorite of Denver omelet, hash browns, and wheat toast. After the meal, Jerrod leaned back to enjoy his coffee. He looked at his mother and asked, "What did you want to talk about, Mom?" She looked worried and didn't meet his gaze. Taking a deep breath, she said, "Jerrod, I need to ask you something about the rumors I've been hearing. You've been out so late and sometimes you don't come home at all. Do you have a girlfriend now, or what's going on? You wouldn't believe what people are saying about you. They think you and Doris and some of the other older ladies from the senior center dances are together. Jerrod, is that true?" Feeling embarrassed, Jerrod's face flushed. He had been worried this moment would come for several months. At least he had some time to think about how to deal with it. He sighed and looked at his mother. She seemed even more embarrassed than he was. "Mom, I don't know what people are saying, but I can guess. I suppose it was bound to happen. I have several friends who are older, and some of them are from your support group. They're all nice ladies who feel lonely. I help them with small tasks and keep them company when they need it." His mother frowned and looked him in the eye. "Is that what you call it now? Keeping them company? You're really doing what they say, aren't you? You're spending time with women who are older than I am. I just can't believe it. Why would you do that? How could you take advantage of those older women?" "Mom, it's not like that. I'm not taking advantage of them. We're friends." Jerrod gave a weak smile and continued, "I guess you could say we're friends who help each other out. I didn't look for them. They came to me. Doris was the first one, and I didn't know how to respond at first. I just went along with what she wanted. Then she told some of her friends, and they came to me too. I finally had to tell them I wasn't interested in adding more to my life. I said I'd be friends, but they needed to stop letting the older women think I was available for more. Some still show interest because they need companionship. I might have hurt a few feelings, but we all agreed that what we're doing isn't harming anyone, and it makes us happy, so there's nothing wrong with it. Nothing wrong with it? Jerrod, of course there is something wrong with it. Your father and I raised you to know better. It's not right. Those women are too old for you, and you all should feel ashamed. Mom, I'm not really proud of this, but I'm not ashamed either. Those ladies are my friends, and we help each other out. We're careful, and I would be surprised if anyone knows what's really going on. But maybe some do. I've picked up hints from other older women who seem interested, but I ignore them. Sometimes we just sit together and play cards, having a good time like friends do. Other times I do spend the night with one of them, but it's always mutual. Doris told me that everyone has needs, and it's okay to meet them. Don't you wish you had someone to share those moments with? Jerrod, that's not your concern. Jerrod sat at the kitchen table, his mother across from him. The conversation had taken a serious turn. I loved your father deeply, Jerrod. Of course, I miss him every day, but he's gone now, and I've learned to live with that. I don't understand why you feel the need to bring this up in such a way, his mother said, her voice tinged with both sadness and frustration. Jerrod sighed and leaned back in his chair. Mom, I didn't mean to upset you. All I'm saying is that people get lonely. I was lonely too. I found ways to deal with it, and yes, it's unconventional, but no one's being hurt. I'm sorry if my choices bother or embarrass you. If it's too much, I'll move out. I don't want to make things harder for you. His mother stared at him for a moment, then let out a long breath. No, Jerrod, I don't want you to leave. You're my son, and I need you here. But I do need you to be more discreet. I don't want to hear about your activities from the church ladies or the preacher. It's humiliating. Jerrod frowned, his voice firm but calm. Mom, I'm not doing anything wrong. I'm not taking advantage of anyone, and I'm not doing it for money. These are just friendships, connections with people who feel alone. If people misunderstand that, it's their problem, not mine. His mother nodded slowly. Fine, but please, Jerrod, just keep it private. In the weeks that followed, Jerrod found a balance between his time at work, his mother, and his unique friendships. He spent weekday mornings and lunchtimes at home with his mother, working at the cabinet shop during the day. Evenings were divided among his friends, though he always kept Thursdays and Sundays free for his mother. Sometimes his evenings were spent in quiet conversation, enjoying a meal, or simply providing company. Other times, he attended small gatherings with his friends and their acquaintances. The companionship seemed to brighten their lives, and Jerrod found fulfillment in being there for them. Hope, one of his closest friends, particularly enjoyed Friday nights out on the town. They often went to Centerton for dinner and dancing. These nights were lively and full of energy, and the joy of it all brought a sense of normalcy and happiness to both of their lives. One Friday night, however, things took a surprising turn. As Jerrod and Hope returned from an evening out, laughter and lightheartedness filled the air. Suddenly, the door to Hope's bedroom slammed open, startling them both. Jerrod jumped, his heart racing, as the unexpected interruption shattered the peaceful moment. Hope gasped, her expression shifting from shock to confusion as they both turned to see what had caused the commotion. The atmosphere changed abruptly, and Jerrod instinctively moved to protect her, unsure of what would come next. Jerrod barely had time to react when a sudden pain shot through his side. He rolled off the bed onto the floor, clutching his ribs. The source of the pain quickly became clear as he saw a pair of denim-clad legs standing nearby. Looking up, he spotted a young woman gripping a baseball bat, her expression full of anger. "Stay right there," she said sharply. "If you move before the police get here, I swear I'll hit you again." The woman turned to Hope, who was still frozen in place on the bed. "Mom, are you okay? Do you need me to call the police? Did he hurt you?" Hope shook her head, her voice trembling as she replied, No, I'm fine." She quickly climbed out of bed and knelt beside Jerrod, who was still on the floor. Her tone softened as she placed a hand on his cheek. "Jerrod, are you all right? Can you move? Should I call an ambulance?" The young woman's tone grew more incredulous. "Mom, get away from him. Why are you worried about him after what just happened?" Hope glanced up at her daughter, her voice firm but calm. "Barbara, put the bat down. Jerrod didn't hurt me. Help me get him back onto the bed and then go fetch some ice and a wet cloth." Barbara hesitated, her grip on the bat tightening, but finally complied. Together, the two women helped Jerrod back onto the bed. He grimaced in pain as they moved him, the spot where he had been struck already starting to bruise. Once Barbara returned with the ice and cloth, Hope wrapped the ice in the rag and gently applied it to Jerrod's side. After covering him with a sheet, Hope sat on the edge of the bed, her hand resting lightly on his forehead. She looked at Barbara, who was now sitting in a chair across the room, her face streaked with tears. "Barbara, I'm sorry you had to see that. But what are you doing here? Where's Toby?" Barbara's voice cracked as she replied, "I left him, Mom. I've had enough. I caught him cheating on me again tonight, so I packed my things and came home." Her eyes flicked toward Jerrod, her tone shifting to confusion. "I guess I jumped to the wrong conclusion. But seriously, Mom, isn't he a little young for you?" Hope smiled faintly and sighed. "Barbara, this is Jerrod. Well, I guess you could say we're friends. He's been kind to some of us older women in town since moving back here. He helps us feel a little less lonely." Barbara stared at her, still processing what she was hearing. "Wait, are you saying it's not just you? There are others?" Hope chuckled lightly. "Yes, there are a few of us. Doris introduced us to him. Sometimes we all get together to play cards or share meals. It's nothing dramatic. We're just friends helping each other not feel so alone." Barbara frowned, her tone skeptical. "Doris? The one from the dances? You mean you still spend time with her? And this is something you all do?" Hope's smile didn't waver. "Barbara, it's not what you're imagining. We're just people looking out for each other. It's as simple as that." Barbara sat silently, her emotions a mix of disbelief and exhaustion. Hope reached over, her voice soft. "You've been through a lot tonight, sweetheart. Why don't you get some rest? We'll talk more in the morning." We also spent some time alone with him now and then. When we were alone, we did what we wanted. Sometimes we just talked or cuddled. Other times we went out or did different activities. Jerrod drifted off to sleep, and the women moved to the living room. Hope turned to Barbara and said, "I'm sorry about Toby. I always knew he wasn't good for you. He was like that when we were younger. I tried to get you to reconsider marrying him, but you thought you knew what was right. That's all I will say about that. You can move back home if you want, but Barbara, I want you to know that if Jerrod wants to see me, I will still spend time with him. He has been a bright spot in my life since your father passed away, and I don't want to lose him." For the next few weeks, things felt a bit strange and awkward at Hope's house as Barbara adjusted to her new living situation. She wasn't comfortable with the idea of her mother's partner being her age, and it was hard for her to sleep on nights when they were together. Sadly, Jerrod and her friends began to see Doris's health decline. She was almost 66 and looked older. Her memory was getting worse, and she was taking strong medicine for severe high blood pressure. Her tough life and unhealthy eating habits had finally taken a toll on her. Jerrod still visited her, and some nights he stayed with her, but it had been a long time since they had shared a close moment. There were a few times they tried to use a gel for comfort before they decided to stop sharing that part of their relationship. Jerrod and his friends became more worried about Doris as she was becoming weaker. It had been a while since they had been close. One day, Frances called him at work, crying. "Jerrod," she said, "we had to take Doris to the hospital this morning. I hadn't heard from her since Tuesday, so I went to check on her. She was lying on the kitchen floor. The doctor said she had a stroke. I know she would love it if you could visit her." Doris recognized her friends, but the stroke had affected how she could talk. She held on for 3 days, but then she had another stroke at night and passed away. Jerrod was at Hope's house that evening when they received the news. All the friends gathered there to mourn. Jerrod sat with his arms on his knees, tears streaming down his face. The older women were sad, but they didn't cry like Jerrod did. Barbara was busy trying to help the women and Jerrod feel comfortable. When she saw him crying, she sat next to him and wrapped her arm around him. She rested her head on his shoulder. For a while, she didn't say anything, then she asked, "You cared for her a lot, didn't you, Jerrod?" Jerrod nodded and replied, "Yeah. She was like the grandma I never had and also a friend. He lifted his head a bit and looked around at the other ladies in the room. He took a breath and continued, I care about them all, and it hurts to think about this happening again. Every woman I get close to either leaves me or something happens to them. Jerrod felt more sad about Doris than the other ladies did. He felt a special bond with Hope and spent most of his free time with her. His mother didn't quite understand and felt a little hurt by how he was acting. She tried to comfort him but felt ignored. The first Monday after Doris was laid to rest, Jerrod was at a loss for what to do. Gail worried about him and eventually sent him home in the early afternoon. Jerrod walked into the house but couldn't find peace. He felt aimless. After drinking a few beers, he decided to leave. He got into his truck and drove to Doris's house. He used his key to enter and then crawled into her bed, resting his head on her pillow as he fell asleep. Jerrod had not spoken much to his mother before he left that day. She had tried to talk to him, but he seemed distant. He didn't tell her where he was going or when he would return. She knew he usually spent Monday evenings with Doris. Around 10 in the evening, she became worried and started calling him, but he didn't answer his phone. In her worry, she began calling his friends to check on him. None of them had seen him, which made them all anxious. Hope, especially worried, hurried out of her house to find him. Barbara offered to help her look. Since the town was small, the two women drove around, checking all the places he might be. Barbara thought to check Doris's old house. When she arrived and saw Jerrod's truck, she knocked on the door but didn't get a response. Nervously, she entered the dark house and began searching. When she reached the bedroom, she found Jerrod curled up and asleep, hugging a pillow. She gently sat down next to him and touched his shoulder. "Jerrod," she whispered, "are you okay?" She shook him gently to wake him. He turned slightly and looked up at Barbara. She could see sadness in his eyes. "Jerrod, are you okay?" she asked again. This time, he heard her and nodded. "Yeah, I'm fine. What are you doing here?" "Your mother was worried about you. When you didn't answer your phone, she called all your friends and we all started to worry when no one could find you. Is there anything I can do for you, Jerrod?" "No, I just need to be alone." "No, that's the last thing you need, Jerrod." Jerrod rolled away from Barbara again and lay still. His breathing was uneven and his eyes glistened slightly. Barbara quietly stood and left the room. When Barbara entered the living room, she called Kelly to share some good news. "I found Jerrod at Doris's old house and he's all right. He was asleep when I got here. I woke him up and he said he was fine, then he went back to sleep. I think he just misses Doris. He's in her bed hugging her pillow. I'll stay here with him tonight to make sure he's okay. Can you call everyone and let them know I found him?" Barbara sat in the quiet room for a while, feeling tired. She noticed Jerrod mumbling in his sleep, so she went into the bedroom again. He was still holding the pillow. Barbara lay down behind him, wrapping her arm around him gently. Feeling her warmth, Jerrod relaxed and drifted back into a deep sleep. Barbara soon fell asleep too. The bright morning sun woke her up, and she found Jerrod still in her arms. Holding him felt comforting. She smiled to herself, understanding why others cared for him so much. When Jerrod woke up, he felt a soft presence behind him. For a moment he was confused, but then he recognized where he was. He remembered that Doris was no longer with them, but didn't know who was beside him. He shifted slightly and turned to see Barbara. He was surprised to be so close to her. "What are you doing here?" he asked. "Your mom was worried about you, Jerrod. She called your friends when you didn't answer your phone. Remember I mentioned that last night? Since we didn't know where you were, we felt we needed to find you. I came to check on Doris's house and found you sleeping here. I tried waking you, but you didn't want to get up. So I thought it would be best to stay with you," she explained. "Yeah, I'm okay, I guess. You didn't have to stay, though. I know how you feel about me and your mom. I'll be fine," he replied. Just then, they heard a door close and voices coming from the living room. Kelly called out, "Jerrod, are you back there? Are you okay?" Footsteps approached, and soon Kelly and Hope entered the room. Jerrod moved away from Barbara and sat on the edge of the bed. He looked up just in time to take a cup of coffee from his mother. Hope gave Barbara a cup too. Barbara sat beside Jerrod and wrapped him in a warm hug. His mother sat on his other side, trying to do the same. She gave him a gentle kiss and said, "We were so worried about you, son. Please don't ever scare us like that again." The three women persuaded Jerrod to leave with them. He rode to the local cafe with Barbara, where he, his mother, and his friends had breakfast together. Afterward, Jerrod rode with his mother back to Doris's house to get his truck, then followed her home so he could go to work. Over the next few weeks, Jerrod began to feel better, but he still missed Doris at times. His friends felt the same way. Eventually, Jerrod started attending some of the support group meetings with his mother as well. He began to include his time with Doris on Mondays, along with the days he spent with Hope and Barbara. He started looking forward to seeing Barbara just as much, if not more, than he did Hope, and definitely more than the other two ladies. He was happy to have become good friends with Barbara, especially when she greeted him with her bright smile. He enjoyed their conversations together, too. Many evenings at Hope's house, Jerrod and Barbara would sit on the couch and chat. Over time, Barbara sat closer to him. A couple of times, he noticed Hope watching them as they talked. He couldn't figure out the expression on her face. Was it confusion or concern? He wasn't sure and didn't understand why she looked at him that way. Visiting Hope's house began to feel strange, especially when he stayed over. Sometimes he caught a glimpse of sadness on Barbara's face when he and Hope left for a night out together. One evening when he arrived, Barbara smiled when he opened the door. She came over, gave him a quick hug and a gentle kiss on the cheek. Stepping back, she said, "Mom's almost ready, Jerrod. Are you doing anything special tonight?" Jerrod noticed Hope standing in the hallway looking at them again. He smiled at her, then turned his attention back to Barbara and said, "No, not really. We're just going out for a nice meal and then catching a movie." As he started to walk past Barbara, he had an idea. "Hey," he said, "why don't you join us?" Jerrod glanced at Hope and saw an unfamiliar look on her face. He added, "You don't mind, do you, Hope? I should have asked you first." Barbara felt excited when Jerrod invited her, but then her heart sank. She knew that she didn't want to get in the way of her mother's plans. Looking at her mother, she noticed that she seemed uncomfortable with the idea of Barbara being there. Turning back to Jerrod, Barbara said, "No, I couldn't. I don't want to make things more complicated for Mom." "Thank you for asking." She turned and walked down the hallway to her bedroom. As she passed by her mother, Hope reached out and touched her arm. "Barbara, I don't mind at all. I think it would be fun for us all to go out together. I can spend some time with Jerrod later if he wants to. Now hurry up and get ready." "No, Mom, I couldn't." "That's not true. Jerrod is right. It would be great if you joined us. Now hurry." That evening, the three of them enjoyed themselves more than Jerrod and Hope usually did on their own. They had a lovely meal at a nice French restaurant they both liked, then went dancing at a classy club. Jerrod danced with both women until he was so tired he could barely move. While he danced with Hope, Barbara stayed at the table and watched them. Hope noticed Barbara turned down several offers to dance from some charming men. Hope, on the other hand, accepted many of those invitations while Jerrod danced with Barbara. Hope watched the young couple as they enjoyed the night together. It was clear they were having a great time, and so was she. Over the next 3 months, it became a regular thing for Barbara to join Hope and Jerrod when they went out. Whenever Jerrod was with them, Barbara focused on him and listened closely to what he said. If Hope offered Jerrod a drink or extra food when they ate together, Barbara would quickly jump up to get it for him. Hope noticed that she and Jerrod weren't as close as they used to be. When they were together, she sensed some hesitation from him, as if he wasn't fully present. One Sunday morning after Jerrod left, Hope wandered into the living room still in her robe. She and Jerrod had shared a nice moment the night before, and she felt good about it. When she stepped outside, she saw Barbara sitting on the porch, staring into the distance. Hope made herself a cup of coffee and joined Barbara. She noticed Barbara had been crying and asked, "What's wrong, dear?" "Mom, I have to leave. I can't handle this anymore. I can't stand hearing you at night with Jerrod. It's really hard for me." Hope felt her heart ache at her daughter's words and the pain in her eyes. She sat down next to Barbara, wrapped her arms around her, and kissed her gently on the cheek. "I'm sorry, dear. I had a feeling, but I didn't fully realize until now. You love him, don't you?" Barbara sniffled and nodded. "Yes. I thought I could be okay with it, but I just can't. I love you, Mom, and I want you to be happy. I think I'll have to move back to the city. I'm really sorry." "Don't apologize, sweetheart. We can't help who we love. Please, just give it a couple of weeks before you decide anything. Maybe we can find a way to work this out. No, Mom. I don't want to share him with you, if that's what you're saying. I know it sounds selfish, but I want a husband I can care for and who will care for me. I want a father for my kids. Please, just wait a couple of weeks for me. None of us love Jerrod that way. You deserve a chance with him if you want it. But what does he think about this? Have you two talked? Or did he say he doesn't feel the same about you? No, Mom. I haven't told him, and we haven't talked. I didn't want to hurt you or him, so I thought I needed to leave. That afternoon, Hope called Francis and Edwina, asking them to meet her at Doris's old house. Since Francis was in charge of the estate, they had access whenever they needed. When they all sat together with coffee and cookies, Hope said, "Ladies, we have a problem. There's no easy way to say this, so I'll get to the point. Barbara is in love with Jerrod, and I think he feels the same way. We haven't spent as much time together lately, and he has been quieter than usual. I think he feels bad about Barbara." Frances looked at Edwina with a knowing smile. She raised her eyebrows and turned back to Hope. "You too," she said. "I thought it was just me. He has been distant, and we haven't been close for weeks. What do we do about it?" Edwina looked a bit guilty. "I stopped trying to get his attention almost 2 months ago. He just didn't seem interested, and the last few times we were together felt like we were just going through the motions. I was thinking about going back to the dances, but I didn't want to hurt his feelings." The three women talked a bit longer before heading to Hope's house. They found Barbara in her bedroom, packing. "Barbara, what are you doing?" Hope asked. "I thought you promised to stay a bit longer while we figured things out." "It's no use, Mom. I just can't stay. I have to go." "I'm sorry." Hope looked at her friends and took Barbara's hand, guiding her into the living room and into a chair. The three older women sat where they could see Barbara, and Hope began to speak. "Barbara, we all knew our time with Jerrod would have to end eventually. We've sensed something wasn't right for a while now. I feel ashamed that I suspected you and Jerrod were in love, but I never had the courage to ask either of you. I've watched you both since that night in Doris's room, and I just couldn't bring myself to say anything. Barbara, we're all ready to step back if you and he want to be together. Francis and Edwina haven't been with him for a couple of months, and last night was the first time we had any kind of closeness in over a month. I'm not sure he would have done it back then, but I pushed because I really needed it." Barbara looked at her mother, tears streaming down her face. "Mom, you deserve to be happy too. I can't let you do this. I have to go." "Oh, sweetie, I'm happy, and I can be happy without Jerrod. I don't love him that way. There was never a real chance for us to be together or get married. We were just using one another. If there's any chance that you and he could fall in love— No, I know you already have feelings for each other. If there's any chance you two might get married, I can't keep seeing him like that. Francis and Edwina agree with me. We've decided to see Jerrod only as a group from now on. We're going to start going to dances again and try to find men closer to our ages. Meanwhile, you can continue seeing Jerrod to find out if he is what you hope he is." Hope looked over at Barbara and added, "But I'm worried it's going to be hard. Jerrod has been hurt and has a lot of mistrust inside him. He's been serious with 3 women who ended things with him. We all watched him after he moved back, and he has never had a relationship with a woman younger than me. He thinks he attracts the wrong kind of woman and assumes young women are not genuine. I guess, in a way, what we've been doing reinforces that idea. You have some hope because of how you met him and because the 3 of us are supporting you, but it's not going to be easy. Now, are you going to step up and try to win him over, or are you going to run away like a brat?" Barbara smiled through her tears and said, "I want to try to find a good man this time, Mom." She added, "I think it might work better if I stay relaxed, don't you think?" The 4 women laughed, and Edwina said, "That might actually be a good idea, Barb. Doris once told me she caught Jerrod's attention by wearing a short skirt when they first started dating. She always joked about getting him to help with her plumbing because of how she approached him." That afternoon, the 4 women made a plan and set it in motion for the very next day. From then on, the only one alone with Jerrod was Barbara. Sometimes it would just be Barbara and Hope at home with him, but there were always at least 2 of them around. The first Friday after the older ladies decided to give Jerrod up, he came to Hope's house for their regular date. When Jerrod arrived, Hope and Barbara were in the living room, ready for the night. Once again, Barbara welcomed him into the house. His face brightened when he saw her. She guided him to a chair, and he couldn't take his eyes off her as they walked. Hope watched them and smiled. She then made a sad face and said, "Jerrod, I'm sorry, but I can't join you and Barbara tonight. I promised the girls I would go to the dance with them. It's only for people 50 and over, so you can't come in. Would you be okay if the two of you went out for dinner instead?" Jerrod glanced at Barbara. He thought she looked wonderful. He didn't even look at Hope when he said, "I'm sorry, Hope, but I wouldn't mind taking Barbara at all, if she wants to go alone with me." Barbara's face lit up with a big smile. Hope smiled back and said, "Great! Why don't you two go on then? I'll drive over to Francine's house and we'll leave from there." That evening was one of the best that Jerrod and Barbara could remember in years. They spent the entire time gazing into each other's eyes, finding any chance to touch each other. They danced until the club closed at 2 a.m. Normally, when Hope was with him, they would leave around 11 p.m. or 11:30 p.m. When they returned to Hope's house, Jerrod followed Barbara inside as usual. This time, though, he felt unsure of what to do. They usually headed straight to the hallway and the bedrooms after dinner and dancing. Jerrod would often spend the night with Hope, while Barbara would be alone in her room. But now, both he and Barbara felt a bit nervous around each other. Finally, she smiled and said, "Would you sit with me for a while, Jerrod?" Jerrod took a deep breath and perked up. They went to the living room and sat on the couch. Jerrod was surprised when Barbara sat next to him. She took off her shoes, rested her feet on the coffee table, and leaned back on the couch. "That was so much fun, Jerrod. Thank you for taking me. I had a better time tonight than I've had in months." "Yeah, me too. It felt a little odd without your mom here, though. I hope she's all right." Barbara felt a wave of sadness wash over her, but pushed the fear away to enjoy the moment. She sat up a bit and gave him a gentle kiss on the cheek. When Jerrod turned slightly towards her, she gave him a soft kiss on the lips. He turned back to the front and rested his head on the couch. "I'm so tired tonight," Jerrod said. "I think you barely let me sit out at all during the dances." "I'm sorry, Jerrod. I didn't mean to wear you out. I was just having so much fun I almost couldn't stop. Will you forgive me?" The two friends talked for a few more minutes, both yawning and feeling very tired. Jerrod was at a loss for what to do next. He didn't feel right about just going into Hope's room and going to bed, and he definitely didn't want to sleep with Barbara well. He admitted to himself that he would like to, but she hadn't invited him, and it didn't seem right to him. Finally, Jerrod stood up and said, "I guess I should head home, Barb. It's getting late and we need to get some rest." Barbara felt tears welling up. She had been giving what she thought were gentle hints for Jerrod to stay the night, but he seemed to miss them. Or maybe worse, he didn't want to stay. She thought about asking him to come to bed with her, but she just couldn't bring herself to do it. Instead, she asked, "Do you really have to go, Jerrod? You know you can stay here." "Yeah, I think I should. It doesn't feel right to just get in your mother's bed without her around. What if she brings someone home? That would be really awkward." He looked upset and added, "I guess I better head home. See you." Over the next few weeks, the women kept trying to bring Barbara and Jerrod together. They acted like they weren't doing anything, but to Jerrod it was pretty clear something was going on. When they started avoiding him and went back to the dances at the senior center, he thought he understood the message. It seemed they decided he was too young for them and wanted to move on. He stopped visiting them and began spending more time at home with his mother after work. He started to drink a bit more, having 3 or 4 beers almost every night. He convinced himself that there must be something about him that women didn't want for the long run. He wondered time and again what might be wrong with him. Kelly was unaware of the plans to set Barbara up with Jerrod. All she knew was what she saw. Jerrod was alone and staying home. He had been dropped by his friends. To her surprise, she felt angry at the women. She hated to see her son unhappy and felt they had used him until they grew tired of him. One day, while Jerrod was working, Kelly decided to confront the women. Since he spent most of his time with Hope, she chose to start there. Kelly arrived at Hope's house around 10 in the morning and rang the bell. Barbara answered the door and exclaimed, "Oh, Mrs. Patrick, come in, please. It's a surprise to see you. Have a seat. What can I do for you?" "Actually, dear, I'm here to see your mother. I need to talk to her as soon as possible. Oh, no. Is Jerrod okay? He didn't get hurt, did he? Kelly looked at Barbara, surprised. Then she realized that Barbara was worried because Jerrod was her mother's boyfriend, and she didn't want her mother to be upset. No, dear. Jerrod isn't hurt. At least he isn't hurt physically. I'm not sure about his feelings or mindset, though. Around that time, Hope entered the room. Kelly greeted her coldly, and both Hope and Barbara were taken aback. In the past, when they all met, Kelly was always friendly. When Kelly asked to speak to Hope alone, Hope replied, "I would prefer if Barbara joined us too, Mrs. Patrick. This seems related to Jerrod, and I think she should be here as well." "Okay, if that's what you want. I wanted to protect you from any awkwardness, but I will discuss this in front of your daughter if necessary. I never liked what you and Jerrod were doing, but he convinced me it was all right and that it wasn't hurting anyone. I let it go, but I can't stay quiet now. He has been downcast for 3 weeks since you all decided to stop seeing him. I know he is younger than you, and you might be looking for people closer to your age. I told him at the beginning that he needed to find someone his own age. I'm really upset about how this breakup was handled." Barbara sat quietly, looking sad and biting her lips. Hope glanced at her and then at Jerrod's mother. Finally, she said, "I think I may have made a mistake, Mrs. Patrick. Barbara, would you excuse us for a moment? Mrs. Patrick, can we step into the kitchen to talk more privately? I believe we need to discuss some things." Hope shared details about her relationship with Jerrod and what little she knew about the other 3 women involved with him. She then said, "I think we may have not approached this the right way. I was never really proud of what we were doing. I don't mind if 2 people care for each other, but I worried about the age difference between Jerrod and me. I was also concerned about our feelings. I didn't love him and knew I probably wouldn't. I was afraid he might develop feelings for me, which I didn't want. I was so eager for kindness and affection that I let my wants cloud my judgment. I understood that neither of us was looking for a serious relationship when it started. I told myself we could stay friends until we found someone special. Sadly, our connection pushed away possible partners. After Doris passed away, I think we all began to reconsider our relationship with Jerrod. At least, that's what I sensed. A few weeks ago, Barbara mentioned moving out, even though she still hasn't found a job. I was heartbroken." Hope felt a bit embarrassed, then continued, "I had just spent a nice evening with Jerrod, and I might have been a bit too loud. Barbara told me she just couldn't bear hearing me and Jerrod any longer, so she had to leave. Suddenly, everything I had noticed over the past weeks hit me hard. Jerrod had been growing distant from me. When I asked Francis and Edwina about it, they said it had been weeks since they had been close to him too. Most of the time in our relationship, we had to be the ones to start things with Jerrod. In recent months, he had turned us down a few times. Then one day, it all became clear. I had been watching Barbara and Jerrod when they were together. They were so caring towards each other and looked happy. The realization hit me hard. My daughter and your son were in love. The girls and I were keeping them apart, and I didn't like it. I started to arrange for them to spend time together. The first Friday after I figured it out, I sent them out to dinner and dancing alone. I have done that most of the time since. The only one Jerrod has spent time alone with lately is Barbara. But then, about 3 weeks ago, he stopped coming around. We called him several times, and he barely spoke to us. Barbara is heartbroken. She feels guilty for breaking up with Jerrod and sad because he doesn't see her as more than a friend. We are unsure what to do next. Kelly, I know you may not like me, but please, for Jerrod, if not for Barbara or me, can you help us with this?" Kelly looked at Hope for a moment. Finally, she said, "How do I know what you're saying is true? Do you have any evidence that he loves Barbara, or she loves him?" "I don't have proof, but if we can get them together, I bet you will see it for yourself." "What is Jerrod doing today?" "Just the same as any other day lately. He works, comes home, has a beer, eats, and goes to bed. Why?" "Could Barbara and I come over this evening to see you? I think you will understand if we do. Then, if you have any ideas to help us, I would be very thankful." Kelly reluctantly agreed. Hope and Barbara arrived around 8 p.m. that evening. When Barbara saw where they were going, her mother insisted she go with her for ice cream. She almost didn't want to get out of the car. Jerrod was slumped in his chair, watching an old movie on TV. He had already had a couple of drinks and was feeling relaxed. Barbara and Hope entered the house through the back door. The three women sat in the kitchen talking. Kelly sat where she could see the door from the den. Barbara was sitting between the door and the refrigerator. The women were starting to think Jerrod would never come to the kitchen for another drink when he finally walked in. He stopped when he saw the women. His eyes were focused on Barbara. Both of their faces brightened when they spotted each other. Jerrod stood still for a moment and then said, "Hello, Hope, Barbara. What brings you here?" Without thinking, Barbara stood up and walked in front of Jerrod. She looked him in the eye and gently touched his arm. "We were worried about you, Jerrod. No one has seen you for 3 weeks. We asked your mother if we could visit, so here we are." "Yeah, well, I'm fine," Jerrod said, walking back to the refrigerator to grab another drink. As he moved away, Barbara seemed to lose some of her energy. Kelly noticed how quickly their expressions changed when they first saw each other, and how Barbara's mood dropped after Jerrod brushed her off. When Jerrod returned to his movie, Kelly turned to Hope and said, "That was pretty clear, wasn't it? Even someone who can't see would understand. I'm still not sure if the three of you did the right thing, but I appreciate your effort." Kelly then turned to Barbara and said, "Sweetheart, could you do me a favor? Would you go into the den and keep Jerrod company for a bit? I want to discuss this situation with your mother." Barbara smiled and silently got up. She walked into the den and took a seat next to Jerrod on the couch, mimicking his relaxed position with her feet on the table. Kelly and Hope talked for about an hour. When it was time to leave, they walked to the den and stopped in surprise. Jerrod and Barbara were both asleep. Barbara had her head on Jerrod's chest, looking peaceful. Kelly glanced at Hope and said, "Well, I guess that shows how things really are. Now how can we get him to start visiting us again?" One thing the women did was to bring Jerrod back into their lives. They all cared for him deeply and missed his visits, which made it easier for them. It was a little harder to get Jerrod to start coming around again. Finally, the women decided to approach him one evening after he finished work. They had thought about using tears to persuade him, but that turned out to be unnecessary. They all felt emotional when they talked to him about why he stopped visiting. Barbara was perhaps the most affected. She walked up to Jerrod, wrapped her arms around him, and rested her head on his chest, teary-eyed. "Jerrod, when I first saw you again, I never thought I would want to see you back. I really enjoyed our talks when you came to our house and when we met elsewhere. I especially loved the times we spent together. Jerrod, I miss you just as much or even more than the other ladies do. Please don't leave us behind in your life." Jerrod agreed and started visiting the women again. He never stayed the night but often spent late hours with them. Sometimes all of the friends would get together. To his surprise, his mother even joined them occasionally. Whenever his mother was there, Jerrod noticed that he and Barbara often found themselves talking to each other, while the other women chatted about sewing or quilting, topics that interested them more. One evening, after they had been sitting together for a few minutes, Jerrod and Barbara discussed the movies that would be showing soon. They realized they both wanted to see the same film. Barbara looked at Jerrod and said, "If we hurry, we can make the late show tonight. Let's go watch the movie while the others talk about their sewing." "Sure, let's do it." Neither of the young people noticed the happy smiles on the older women's faces when they announced their plan to leave. It would have surprised them to hear what the women said after they went out together. Jerrod started to feel a lot happier after his friends welcomed him back. Yet, he still felt unsure about Barbara. Eventually, Barbara started coming to his shop out of longing. At first, she just visited and sat with him while he worked. They shared lunch and enjoyed each other's company. When just visiting didn't seem enough, she began to observe his work and tried to help him out. One day during lunch, Jerrod looked at Barbara with a serious face and asked, "What are you doing here? You've spent almost as much time here as I have." "I miss you, Jerrod, and I like being with you. My mom is often out with her friends, and I feel lonely. I don't enjoy chatting about what they talk about, so I don't go with her. I haven't found a job yet, and I really enjoy being here with you. I don't want to bother you. I just like watching you work. Plus, I think building cabinets is fun. You make such beautiful things here. I like being part of it." Barbara looked nervous and added, "If you don't want me here, I can leave. Is that what you want?" She seemed ready to leave as she asked, No, Barbara. I like having you around too. I just wanted to understand how you felt. I'm sorry you haven't found a job. It can be tough. I really value your help. I didn't expect to have so much work when I took over the shop from my mom. Honestly, I didn't want to be this busy. I can use the extra hands for sure. They finished their lunches and headed back to the shop together. For the next week, Jerrod spent more time teaching Barbara how to handle some of the easier tasks. To his surprise, she learned quickly and did a great job after just a few small mistakes. Jerrod usually paid Gail every 2 weeks. On payday, the three friends were sitting in the break area enjoying a few drinks and relaxing after a long week. After sharing a beer, Gail decided to stay a little longer before saying, "Well, I better get going. Perry wants to go out to eat tonight, and I need to get ready." Just before leaving, Gail turned to Jerrod and asked, "Do I need to come in tomorrow, or are we all caught up?" "No, take the day off. I might come in for a bit to sand down the cabinets we finished today, but I don't think we need to do any building tomorrow. Enjoy your weekend." Jerrod and Barbara sat together in comfortable silence for a while. Jerrod kept glancing at Barbara, and eventually she asked, "Why do you keep staring at me, Jerrod? Is something wrong?" Jerrod quickly looked away, embarrassed. "No, Barb, nothing's wrong. You just seem a lot happier than before. You almost glow. I've had more fun working since you started feeling this way than in months. You know you're a lovely woman, and I wonder why you want to be here. You could find a good guy and have a great job if you went back to the city. Using your accounting degree to help me build cabinets seems strange. Come on, if I wanted to stay in the city and find one of those guys, I would have. I've tried that, and it didn't work out. We're too different. Besides, you complaining about my job choice is a bit ironic, isn't it? You have a mechanical engineering degree, and here you are building cabinets. Why not work in the city and have a high-paying job with a fancy girlfriend?" "Touché, Barb. I guess we're quite alike. Unless I grow my business a lot, I won't get rich here, and I don't really want to. I'm happy just making a living selling locally and to some smaller builders. I save a little every month, and that's good enough for me." Jerrod reached into his pocket and took out the last envelope. He leaned over and placed it on Barbara's lap. "Here, this is for you, Barb. Do you want to go to town for a meal with me tonight or tomorrow night, or both?" Barbara looked at the envelope, then began to open it. "I'm really too tired to go to Centerton tonight. Can we just eat at home or at Mom's tonight and go out tomorrow night?" "That works for me. I'm pretty tired, too. How about we go to the cafe for a burger tonight? Mom is busy again. I think she is going out dancing with her friends, and I don't feel like making a sandwich. Jerrod, what's this check for? Why are you giving me $196? That's your paycheck, Barb. You work here. After we talked last week, I thought it was fair to pay you since you've been helping out. I only gave you minimum wage because you mostly ran errands, but I kept track of your hours. That's your pay for the last 6 days. I know you're looking for work and want to stay in town, so now you can. When you get more skilled, I'll raise your pay." "No, I don't want it. I'm not doing this for the money. I like being around you, and it's fun. Here." Barbara held out the check to Jerrod. "No, you earned it, and I won't take it back. I don't want to argue about it." Barbara looked at Jerrod, then back at her check. A tear rolled down her cheek before she said, "Thank you, Jerrod. Can you really afford this? I don't want it if it's going to be a problem for you. I didn't do this for the money." On Sunday, Kelly invited all of Jerrod's friends over for lunch. Jerrod and Barbara spent almost the whole time together. They chatted with the women too, but they stayed close to each other. A few times, Jerrod noticed some of the women watching them and smiling, and it made him a bit uneasy. After that, Jerrod and Barbara started sharing a lot of their evening meals. Sometimes she ate with him and his mom. Sometimes they went to the cafe or to her house. Every weekend, they visited nicer places for dinner and then went dancing or to a show. Jerrod always treated Barbara with respect, but she was getting frustrated with him. She wanted to take the next step and be an official couple. She was sure she loved Jerrod. She had let her mother and Kelly convince her not to rush things. They explained that Jerrod had a rough past with women who said they loved him and then left him, which made her sad for him. Even though she was hurt for him, she felt thankful those women had left him for her. If she could get him to commit, he'd be hers. One Thursday afternoon, Jerrod walked into the shop smiling brightly, waving a bunch of papers at her and Gail. We got the Shaw construction contract for cabinets, woodwork, and built-in bookcases for the new development they're starting. They're going to build at least 20 houses. We will have to work many Saturdays if that's okay with you all. I might even need to hire more help. I almost wish we hadn't gotten the job. We're going to be a lot busier than I wanted. Gail shouted with excitement. Great! Barbara jumped up and hugged Jerrod tightly. That's fantastic, Jerrod, she said happily. Before she let go and slid back onto the floor, she gave him one more kiss. She wrapped her arms around him and looked into his eyes. Not much work got done for the rest of the afternoon. On that Friday, Perry, Gail, Jerrod, and Barbara went to town for a nice meal to celebrate. They shared some wine with their food, and when they got back to Barbara's house, she, Jerrod, and her mother enjoyed 2 more bottles. Hope soon went off to bed, leaving Jerrod and Barbara together. They were so happy that they kept kissing and holding each other close. Barbara stood, and Jerrod admired her. She smiled and offered him her hand. When Jerrod took her hand, she helped him to his feet and led him to her bedroom. That night, Hope listened as her daughter expressed her joy. Barbara was filled with excitement and laughter throughout the night. Jerrod woke up alone in bed around 10 the next morning. He quickly dressed and wandered into the kitchen, finding Hope and Barbara sitting at the table with their morning coffee. Both wore robes, and Jerrod felt a bit awkward as he looked at them. Barbara smiled and stood up to get his coffee. As she stood, her robe shifted slightly. Jerrod and Hope noticed the marks on her skin, but Barbara quickly adjusted her robe. Jerrod looked at Hope and said, I'm sorry. I think we all had too much to drink last night, and it shouldn't happen again. Hope looked surprised, and Barbara turned quickly, accidentally spilling some of Jerrod's coffee. Her expression was a mix of shock and amusement. What are you talking about, Jerrod? You don't need to apologize. I loved it. That was the best experience I've ever had. I now understand why Mom was so loud when you and she were together. I'm not going to hide it. I want to be with you. I want you in my life now and always. So yes, I hope this will happen again. Hope sat at the table, smiling at Jerrod. He felt like a deer caught in headlights, unsure of what to say or do. He slowly sat down at the table and took a sip of his coffee, his mind racing as he looked at a serious Barbara and a happily smiling Hope. I don't know what to say, he admitted. I know there's something wrong with me. You don't want to be my girlfriend, and you certainly don't want to be my wife. Every woman who has gotten to know me has walked away. I don't know what is wrong with me, or I would try to fix it, but I just feel like I wouldn't make a good husband. That's not true. The only problem, Jerrod, is that you choose the wrong friends. Well, I've changed that for you. I chose you first. You can be with me now because I made that choice. I know we are good for each other. Mom, your mom, and all our friends know it too. I care about you, and I know you care about me as well. You've said it many times when we've kissed, and after that amazing night, I know you care about me. No one could connect with someone like that and not have feelings. Yeah, I do care about you, Barbara, but I also care about your mom and Francis and Edwina and my mom, too. I care about many people. Yes, I'm sure you do. They care about you, too, but not like I do, and you don't care for them the way you care for me. Let's be honest. Don't you think we are better together than any of them were with you? I bet we are better together than any of your old girlfriends were, too. I'm not just talking about the physical stuff, even though that was amazing. I've seen how you look at me. You never looked at any of the other girls like that. I know you care about me. Why don't you admit it? Jerrod sat staring at Barbara. He sighed and shook his head. I don't know. I need to think about this. He sat there and finished 3 more cups of coffee and then ate the breakfast in front of him. I need to go. Thanks for breakfast. See you Monday. Barbara rushed after him and hugged him. She gave him a deep kiss. Without thinking, he wrapped his arms around her and kissed her back intensely. They were lost in the moment when the kiss finally broke. Barbara stepped back and said, Wow, that was quite a kiss. Now tell me you don't care. You know you do. The rest of the weekend, Jerrod thought not only about what he and Barbara had done, but also about what she said. He examined how he felt about her. Did he love her? Surprisingly, he thought he might. Should he try another relationship? He wasn't sure. She was different from any other woman he had been serious with. They worked well together and had fun, too. She didn't ask for things like others had, and he couldn't remember her ever wanting anything from him. She always offered to help him with what he needed. He definitely needed to think more about this. Monday morning, Barbara arrived just as Jerrod was unlocking the shop door. She jumped out of her car and hugged him tightly. She gave him a passionate kiss. They were still caught up in the moment when Gail drove up. She got out of her old truck, grinning, and said, "Well, it's about time. I was starting to think you were out of it, Jerrod. When's the wedding?" Jerrod looked surprised, and Barbara blushed. She smiled and said, "You're rushing things, Gail. He hasn't proposed yet, and I haven't given up on him. We finally talked on Saturday morning. I think he's still processing everything." Once again, Jerrod started spending many nights away from home. This time, his mother was not as upset. She always had kind words for Barbara. In fact, several weekends, she and Barbara went shopping together. Sometimes they brought Hope along. Finally, Doris's estate was settled. To his surprise, Jerrod learned that she had left her little house to him. By the time she passed away, Jerrod had made it into a lovely place. She said it looked as nice as it did when her husband was alive. On a Sunday afternoon, nearly 3 months after Jerrod and Barbara started spending so much time together, his mother leaned back from the lunch table and asked, "Jerrod, what are you planning to do about Barbara?" Jerrod looked up at her with surprise. "What do you mean? Is there something wrong with Barbara?" Mrs. Patrick sighed and gave him a frustrated look. "Come on, son. You know what I mean. That woman loves you, and I know you love her too. She deserves better than what you're giving her. The way you treat her sometimes is upsetting. I'm almost ashamed to say you're my son when you act like this." "What do you mean, Mom? I treat her like I treat all my friends. I've never treated her badly, and you know it." "That's not true. You work her hard in the shop, then you keep her up late. What does she get in return? You don't treat her any better than someone you simply pay." Jerrod sat there surprised. He felt his anger grow and his face turned red. He managed to keep calm and replied, "I pay her fairly for her work, and you know it. I've never forced her to do anything, and we both enjoy our free time together. I don't see how you think I'm mistreating her." "Jerrod, sometimes I just don't understand you. I know you've had bad experiences with women, but you have to realize not all women are like that. You know Barbara is different, and it's time you recognize that. She won't wait for you forever, you know that." Kelly stood up from the table and began to clean up. Jerrod got up to help her. After washing her hands, she picked up her purse and said, "I'm going to visit Hope and Barbara. I'll be back later." One evening, about 6 weeks after Doris's house became his, Kelly sat with Jerrod and Barbara after work. She looked at them and said, "Jerrod, I have a suggestion for you. I know you've been thinking about what to do with Doris's old house. I understand why you're unsure about moving into it since your job is here. It makes more sense for you to stay where you are. I don't need a big place, and living here with you no longer feels necessary. All my friends are in town, and I'd like to be closer to them. This house and the land will be yours someday when I'm no longer around. I want to move to Doris's old house and let you and Barbara have this one. We can put all our names on the deeds to make it official. You will need this large house when the kids come, and I'd rather move now than later." "What kids?" Jerrod looked at Barbara, who was blushing. His mother was smiling. Barbara glanced at Kelly and then said, I've been trying to find a way to tell you, Jerrod. When we first got together, I wasn't quite careful enough, and I ended up pregnant. You're going to be a dad in about 6 months." Jerrod sat still, staring at his smiling mother and worried Barbara. A child? He felt a mix of emotions and wanted to comfort Barbara. He stood and took her hand, pulling her close. They shared a kiss, and suddenly his mother said, "I guess we'll discuss this later. I'm planning to start moving tomorrow. You two enjoy your time tonight." After a moment, Jerrod guided Barbara into the house. They went straight to the bathroom and got ready to shower. It was the first time they had been so close in his mother's home. They helped each other clean up, making sure everything was just right. Once they were done, Jerrod took Barbara to his bedroom. He handed her some old sweatpants to wear while he changed into nicer clothes. "Here, put these on for now until we get to your house. We need to celebrate tonight and find you an engagement ring." Barbara's eyes widened, and she started to cry. "Are you sure? You don't have to marry me. I told you I'd be with you however you wanted. Are you really sure? Yes. For the first time, I'm certain I want to marry someone. I want to marry you as soon as we can. I want to have kids with you and work together here in Steelville making cabinets and furniture. If you can be happy with what we earn, I can too. I think we can grow the business a little and do quite well. You were right. I really do love you. I had a long conversation with my mother recently. She helped me see that I truly love you and that I haven't been treating you well. I've been trying to find the courage to tell you this ever since. Don't worry. You've already told me many times. I heard your words before, but your actions showed me even more. Your glances and your gentle touches said it all. I love you too, my dear. Peter sat in the dining room of the country club, listening to his wife Cynthia and daughter Winona express their frustration. They were upset about Winona's fiancé, Jerrod. Cynthia had never liked Jerrod and often used every chance she got to share her negative feelings about him. Over the years, the kind and caring woman Peter had married seemed to change. She became more self-important and looked down on others. Peter could admit that Cynthia had a bit of a proud streak in high school, like many attractive girls. She had been a cheerleader and carried that attitude with her. Still, he remembered her as sweet and loving. But as his job at the bank became better, Cynthia became more difficult to please. She began to act like she was above others and wanted Winona to marry someone from a wealthy or prestigious family. Cynthia preferred friends who were professionals or well-off, and she often ignored the people they had grown up with when they visited their hometown. In her mind, she felt she was better than them. Along with this change, she also shifted from being easygoing to very demanding. Cynthia disliked Jerrod for different reasons that Peter could see. She was not happy about his background, which she now thought was not good enough. Jerrod's father only finished high school and ran a small cabinet-making business, working part-time as a welder. Even though Jerrod was a mechanical engineer at an auto assembly plant, Cynthia viewed this as a blue-collar job. She often belittled Jerrod's work when friends asked about it, making it sound like he worked on the assembly line instead of being an engineer there. As Peter rose in the banking industry, he felt that Cynthia had forgotten where they both came from. She had reduced their visits to their families over the past few years. Although she never clearly explained why, Peter thought it was because she no longer saw them as acceptable. He sensed that Cynthia was embarrassed by their families, as if she thought they were beneath her. Winona and Jerrod were supposed to join Peter and Cynthia at a big event at the country club that evening. When Winona stormed into the club without Jerrod, she told them angrily that he wouldn't be coming. Before he could leave to pick up Winona, Jerrod got a phone call from his mother. She told him that his father had died in an accident. Worried for his mother, Jerrod hurried off to be with her. Winona and Cynthia, however, did not agree with Jerrod's decision. Their disagreement was quite loud, much to Pete's frustration. After a few more unkind remarks about Jerrod, Winona looked up with a smile. One of her old boyfriends was walking toward their table with a big grin on his face. He looked at Pete and Cynthia and said, "Good evening, Mr. and Mrs. Youngblood. How are you tonight?" Then he turned to Winona, gave her a quick hug, and said, "I saw you here with your family and wondered if you would dance with me." Winona beamed and glanced at her mother. Cynthia smiled and nodded slightly. Winona then turned back to the young man and replied, "It would be my pleasure." She let him lead her to the dance floor. Pete watched as Winona and the young man danced effortlessly. She seemed carefree, smiling and laughing while enjoying the moment. To his dismay, an older man approached their table and took Cynthia out to dance. Pete felt anger grow inside him as he watched Cindy lean against the man who was known for charming women at the club. As the night went on, Pete grew more upset with both his daughter and wife. Neither seemed to care about being respectful while dancing. Winona allowed her partner to get too close, which made Pete very angry. He had already talked to her about her behavior once tonight, but it seemed she was even bolder now. Cynthia, meanwhile, was annoyed with Pete for reprimanding Winona. She chose to dance with Saul, someone Pete disliked, as a way to get back at him. When that dance ended, instead of returning to their table, she let another man dance with her. In the next half hour, Cynthia danced with several men known for their flirtatious ways. Finally, Pete had enough. He stepped onto the dance floor and asked to cut in. At first, Cindy didn't want to leave her partner, but when other dancers noticed, She reluctantly moved into Pete's arms. However, before the dance ended, she slipped away to the ladies' room, leaving Pete feeling awkward. Angry, Pete returned to their table and grabbed his drink. He finished his drink and ordered another. He quickly downed it and asked for one more. Just then, Cynthia came back from the restroom. The man he had interrupted grinned when he saw her and met her at the end of the hallway. They chatted for a moment before he led her back to the dance floor. Pete watched in frustration and took another drink. He was getting tipsy as he sat and observed the women on the dance floor. His mind drifted back to the earlier conversation they had before they left him at the table. Peter leaned back in his chair and replayed the conversation in his head. He and Cynthia had looked up when their daughter came over to the table alone. Winona's and Jerrod's meals had already been served. Winona looked at her cold food with annoyance. Her mother smiled at her, but then her expression changed to worry. "I'm sorry about the cold food, honey. I thought you would be on time, so I asked the waiter to leave it for you. Where's Jerrod? Why were you kids late?" "Jerrod's not coming, Mom. He chose to go home to see his mom instead of being here with me." "Oh, you poor thing. What excuse did he give this time? Honestly, that boy will never learn. You deserve so much better than him." Peter recalled feeling shocked when Winona talked about Jerrod's father's death. It sounded like she thought Jerrod was to blame for ruining her plans. Winona had launched into a long list of complaints about Jerrod not being considerate of her. He said, "Calm down, honey. He didn't want this to happen, and you know it. His father passed away. Why are you here? Why not go home with him, Winona?" Winona stared at him in disbelief. She took a deep breath and said, "Yes, he could have tried harder, Daddy. There's nothing he can do at home tonight. He won't even get there until almost midnight. He could have taken me to the dance like he promised and gone home later. We planned this for weeks. He didn't even call to tell me he was going home instead of coming here with me. When I called him to ask where he was, he said he was too worried about his mom and had forgotten our plans. Besides, going to that small town he lives in is the last thing I want to do. I wouldn't go even if he had remembered to call." Pete looked at Winona in disappointment. He couldn't believe how selfish she seemed. He started to tell her she was overreacting when his wife placed her hand gently on Winona's arm and said, "We understand, honey. I always thought he was a careless guy. You can do much better than Jerrod. There was no reason for him not to bring you out tonight. Let's call the waiter and see if they can get you a warm plate. The night is still young. Maybe one of your old friends will show up and you can at least enjoy part of the evening." That conversation happened just before Winona and Cynthia were taken to the dance floor by two men. It was also why Peter sat at his table, thinking about his marriage and watching his wife dance with a group of problematic men. He realized he had a bit too much to drink as he saw his daughter and wife dancing with all the charming but shallow guys at these parties. In his mind, Winona was being too friendly with the young men she danced with. He would have been upset if he had seen Jerrod acting the way those other men were, especially since he anticipated Jerrod would be his son-in-law. Eventually, Winona and Cynthia returned to the table for a moment. The silence was heavy. Winona quickly got up to dance again. As the night went on, Peter grew more frustrated with his wife's behavior. After a couple of times when Winona came back to the table, he tried to talk to her about how she was acting toward Jerrod. He pointed out that it was not appropriate for an engaged woman to act that way on the dance floor. But all he did was make both women angrier, and his attempts to explain Jerrod's actions only upset Winona more. They watched her dance again, laughing and enjoying herself as if everything was fine. Men were nearly fighting for a chance to dance with her. Peter was glaring at his only daughter when Cynthia leaned across the table and whispered sharply, "Are you just going to sit there all night drinking, or are we going to dance, Peter? I came here to dance and socialize. All you have done is sit and make negative comments about Winona and me. You seem determined to embarrass me tonight. You won't let me enjoy the evening with our friends, so at least you could dance with me to show that we're socializing here." Peter felt another wave of anger when he looked at Cynthia. Her eyes were fierce, and her lips were pressed tight in frustration. He began to realize where Winona had gotten her attitude. He couldn't believe he hadn't seen this in his wife before. When they married, they came from working-class families. He had worked hard, going to college and then graduate school to build his career in banking. Now that he thought about it, Cynthia had always wanted more social interaction than he was comfortable with. or than was necessary for his job. She had always admired those with more money or who came from well-known families. Peter had gotten used to giving in to her requests to go to parties and social gatherings to keep peace at home. He knew it was important for him to mingle because of his work, but he realized that at some point, Cynthia had lost touch with her beginnings, and it made him sad. What bothered him even more was how she had influenced their daughter, turning her into a selfish young woman. After thinking that, he reluctantly stood up and offered his hand to Cynthia. He forced a smile and asked her to dance, trying to make her happy. She took his hand with a stiff posture, and he led her to the dance floor. Cynthia smiled and greeted a few people with a slight nod as they walked past. She was tense and still angry during the first dance, but by the middle of the second dance, she began to relax. Peter noticed her gaze fixated on something and turned to see what caught her attention. Winona was cozying up to an old boyfriend, leaning on him while he had his hand on her back and another on her shoulder. Peter quietly muttered, "That girl." "What?" Cynthia noticed where he was looking and giggled. She then smiled at Peter and said, "Isn't that nice? It didn't take her long to find someone better, did it? I'm glad. He seems much better for her than Jerrod. I hope they start dating again." Peter replied, "Cynthia, how can you say that? Jerrod treated Winona really well, while that other guy didn't. Jerrod is an engineer, and that young man barely finished college with a degree in general studies. How much use is that? You need to talk to Winona if it's not too late. If you don't, I will." Cynthia became angry again and said sharply, "You won't do any such thing, Peter. I know what's best for Winona, and it's not that guy. Jerrod always leaves her for silly reasons. Tonight is just another example of that. I want to make sure she stands strong this time. That young man comes from a rich family, while Jerrod's dad is just a carpenter. Winona can do far better than the son of someone who builds cars. No matter how qualified he is, Jerrod won't be worth much compared to the other guy." Peter responded, "That's nonsense. Have you forgotten what our parents did for a living? Like I said, if you don't talk to her, I will. I can't take this anymore." Cynthia tensed up and pulled her hand away from Peter. She glared at him and said, "You won't do any such thing, Peter. If you say one more thing in support of Jerrod or against William, you will regret it. And I haven't forgotten what our parents did to survive. We are beyond that now, and I won't let Winona stoop to that level if I can help it." She glared at Peter, and then walked away toward the restrooms, leaving him alone on the dance floor. Once Cynthia was out of sight, Peter angrily made his way back to his chair. He finished 2 more drinks before Cynthia appeared again. She scanned the room until she spotted Winona and smiled. Winona was at a table with her old boyfriend. Cynthia went over to her daughter, sat down, and chatted with them for a few minutes. Cynthia gave Winona a soft kiss on the cheek, stood up, and headed toward the table where Peter sat. On her way, another member stopped her and pulled her back onto the dance floor. For the next 30 minutes, Cynthia danced with one man after another, not returning to Peter's table. Meanwhile, Peter continued to drink and glare at his wife and daughter. Finally, Cynthia returned to their table. Peter, with his blurry vision, stared up at her as she approached. She frowned at him and said, "You're drunk. Sometimes I really wonder why I married you. You embarrassed Winona by taking sides against her for Jerrod, and now you're embarrassing me by drinking so much in public." Peter looked at Cynthia with heavy eyes and slurred, "Well, forget you. You're just like her, aren't you? Or maybe she's just like you. I can't believe I've been married to you for almost 25 years, and I'm just now seeing how selfish you are. Cynthia, you've become a snob. I liked you better when you were just Cindy, and I want to be called Pete. That's what I've been called all my life until you decided I should use my full name. I don't like it. I don't like what you've turned into either." Peter stood up and swayed a little. He looked at Cynthia and said, "I'm going home. If you want to come with me, let's go." Cynthia stood still, watching him stagger across the floor in shock. She wondered how everything had gone so wrong that evening. Jerrod wasn't even there, yet he had still caused trouble. She disliked him very much for this. Now he had created problems between her and Peter. It would take her weeks to regain control over him if she wasn't careful. Her friends at the club were right. She deserved better than this. Cynthia hurried after Peter, feeling angry inside. She caught up with him at the valet parking area. When he saw her coming, The valet sighed with relief. He had decided Peter was too drunk to drive and was going to withhold the keys. He smiled at Cynthia and handed the keys to her. "Looks like you should drive, ma'am. Here are your keys." Cynthia took the keys from the valet and marched towards the driver's door. She felt embarrassed as the attendant helped Peter into the passenger seat. Once the doors were closed, she whispered sharply, "You've done it again. How could you embarrass me in front of them? This has been a terrible evening." The next day, Peter awoke to bright sunlight filling the room and hitting him in the eyes. His head ached, his mouth felt dry, and his stomach rolled uncomfortably. He nearly felt sick when he rolled off the bed and sat up, holding his head in his hands. After a moment, he managed to get up and walk to the bathroom. He took a much-needed break and then turned to the shower. He had no idea how long he stood there, but the cool water helped ease his headache. It might have been the 3 aspirin he took finally working as well. Peter put on his robe and shuffled downstairs. Not seeing or hearing Cynthia or Winona, he wandered through the house to the kitchen. He found only a little cold coffee left in the maker. Checking the garage, he saw neither Cynthia's car nor Winona's was there. He looked around the house in the usual places for any notes they might have left, but found none. He had no clue where either of them was. Looking at the clock, he sighed. It was almost noon, and he had missed his Saturday morning golf game. While he felt a bit bad for letting his friends down, he thought they could have called if they cared, and as far as he knew, they hadn't. Peter made a fresh pot of coffee and poured himself a cup. He slowly walked into his home office, sat in his chair, leaned back, and rested his feet on the desk, cradling the coffee cup on his stomach as he reflected on the night before. He thought about how Cynthia had treated him over the last few years. Looking at his 4th cup of coffee, he heard the garage door open. Curious, he went back to the kitchen to see who had returned. It was Cynthia. She paused in the doorway and gasped when she saw him. Cynthia's face turned red with emotion. Her eyes sparkled with anger. Before Peter could understand what was happening, she spoke up. "My goodness, it's almost 1 p.m. and you're not even dressed. Why are you home? Did you miss your golf game today? You know how hard I work to set up your golf time for Saturdays. Did you even think about your responsibility to them before you decided to relax at home? I don't know what I'm going to do with you." As soon as she stopped speaking, Cynthia walked quickly past Peter and headed upstairs. She was out of sight before he really noticed what she was wearing. She had on a short skirt and a thin blouse that was not fully buttoned. Peter thought he saw some marks on her skin as she hurried by. He sat at the kitchen table for a moment, trying to understand what he had seen and what Cynthia had said. Feeling uneasy, Peter stood up and went upstairs to follow Cynthia. When he reached their bedroom, he found the bathroom door closed, which was unusual for them. He frowned, remembering that there had been several times recently when she had closed the door while in the bathroom. Peter tried to open the door, but it was locked. This frustrated him. He shook the door handle. Cynthia yelled from inside, "Get away! After how you acted last night, it will be a while before I feel comfortable with you again. I've never felt so embarrassed. Cynthia, what is going on? Why have you been acting this way?" "Nothing is wrong with me, Peter. You are the one with the problem. You ignore your duties, treat me poorly, and take Jerrod's side over your own daughter. Then you think you can just come in here and act as if nothing happened? Not a chance. Please leave while I get ready. And don't forget to set up for our guests tonight." "Where were you, Cynthia? Why didn't you or Winona leave a note?" "I don't have to explain myself to you every moment, Peter. But if you want to know, some friends and I helped Winona move her things from Jerrod's place back to hers. We did that while you were sleeping off your drink. Afterward, we had a nice meal at the club, and then I came home." Cynthia laughed and added, "And you should see the text message Winona is sending to Jerrod to break up with him. It's going to be great. I wish I could see his face when he reads it." Peter walked slowly from the room and returned to his office. He sat back in his desk chair, turned to face the cabinet, and picked up his bottle of Glenlivet. He poured himself a glass and leaned back, placing his feet on the desk. He was thinking about what had just happened when Cynthia burst into his office. Cynthia stood in the doorway with her hands on her hips. Her face was bright red with anger. She shouted, "What's wrong with you, Peter? I tell you to prepare for our guests, and I find you drinking again? Are you planning to embarrass me tonight, like last time?" Pete stared at Cynthia for a moment before replying, No, I'm not going to drink too much again. If you feel embarrassed tonight, it's because of your actions, just like last night. Besides, we have over 2 hours before I need to get ready for your guests." He paused, then added, "I thought this was going to be a catered garden party, so why do I need to set up my bar? And why are you wearing those heavy clothes if we'll be outside in this heat? That blouse looks hotter than what you wore this morning." Cynthia's face turned even redder as she hissed, "What I wear isn't the problem, Peter. I want to look nice for our guests. You can't tell me what to wear." With that, she turned and left the room. Pete didn't see Cynthia again until he went to get dressed for the party. She was in the living room on the phone. He stood at the door for a moment, and she glared at him before turning away and speaking more quietly. Pete didn't know who was invited to the party and wasn't concerned until he actually saw the guests. Saul and 2 other well-known flirtatious men from the club were there, and they were paying a lot of attention to Cynthia. Winona was there, too, with her former boyfriend, who seemed to have returned to her life. There were a few others from the club, but thankfully, he also spotted a couple of friends. Around 8 p.m., Pete went inside to use the bathroom. When he came back outside, he heard Cynthia talking to one of her close friends. She said, "Honestly, I don't know why I continue to deal with Peter's nonsense. Saul is a much nicer man and dances brilliantly. He is more cultured and comes from a better family." Cynthia laughed and went on, "I had a nice chat with him after helping Winona move her things. He's such a good conversationalist and knows many important people in the city. I wish Peter had more of Saul's qualities. Saul understands the significance of belonging to a good family and the right groups. He even offered to help Winona find a better job through some of his connections. I have struggled to get Peter to join the right clubs and go to their meetings. Saul understands how disappointing it is for me to have a son who joined the Navy after high school. I can't help but feel embarrassed. He's just an ordinary enlisted man." Patty smiled and said, "I understand, Cynthia. It seems that old saying is true like father, like son. I remember going through something similar when I had to leave my first husband years ago. Our roles require us to be active in many groups and connect with other people. My first husband was just like your Peter. He didn't get it and wouldn't meet his responsibilities." Patty glanced around and added, "Well, I need to get back to my husband. He seems upset and is looking for me. Honestly, just because I made one small mistake, he thinks I'm hiding away with someone every time he loses track of me at these gatherings. Maybe you can talk to Saul and me again before the night ends. I'll catch you again before we leave." Pete stood nearby, listening to Cynthia and Patty, feeling confused. If what he thought he heard was true, then his marriage might be in serious trouble. He knew Cynthia was unhappy with him. Somewhere along the way, she had lost respect for him. He noticed she was embarrassed by their son Randy being in the Navy, and her words almost suggested she might be interested in Saul. Pete decided he needed to find out more quickly. For now, he went to his office to secure his finances. He moved investments around, changed passwords, and did everything he could to protect his money from a wife he no longer trusted. He was grateful for online banking. The week went by slowly for Pete at home. Cynthia found every chance to remind him she was upset with snappy comments. Pete, in return, did things that would annoy her, trying to push her buttons. One of those things was calling her Cindy, just like he did when they were younger. He smiled every time he saw her face twist in anger when he did that. On Wednesday, he came home to find her gone again. She returned just before 9 p.m., heading straight to the bathroom from the garage without explaining or apologizing for being away. Pete followed her, only to find the bathroom door locked. Thursday morning, Pete looked at Cindy across the breakfast table and said, "I'm going to visit my family this weekend. I want to leave around noon Friday. I'll pack my own bag and leave it by the door so I can grab it when I come by to pick you up." Cindy glared at Pete and simply said, "No. We won't be going home this weekend or any time soon. You know we always go to the club on Saturday nights, and you have golf plans every Saturday morning. We have plans we can't change." Pete looked at Cindy and put down his coffee cup. He said, "It's been almost 6 months since I saw my parents. I want to visit them. Talking on the phone isn't the same. Plus, I want to go fishing and relax by the river for a bit. I need some time off, and so do you." I said no. We don't have time to travel across the state to see our parents. We'll visit them during the holidays like we always do. Pete sat quietly for a moment, then got up and walked out into the garage without saying anything else. He quickly hopped into his truck and drove into town for work. Later that evening, when he got home, he packed a bag for the weekend and loaded it into his F-150. Cindy was gone again, off somewhere unknown. As he closed the truck door, he ran his hand gently along the front fender and smiled. He loved that truck. It was almost new, a 2013 Super Crew 4X4 Platinum Edition in shiny red. Cindy was upset when he traded his 2012 BMW for it. She insisted he return it, saying it wasn't right for a bank president to drive a truck. Pete disregarded her comments about his job title. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't convince her that he was just the manager of the main bank in St. Louis, Missouri, working under a national banking chain. The actual president was much higher in the company. To Cindy, since he was the main guy in St. Louis, he was the president. Friday morning, Pete woke up early and left the house before Cindy got to the kitchen. He stopped for breakfast at IHOP, his favorite place. As he ate, he looked around at the other customers. Cindy disliked IHOP, saying it attracted the wrong crowd. When she went out, it had to be an upscale restaurant. Pete had no problem with the restaurants Cindy liked. They had great food, even if it was expensive. He wasn't a fan of the snobby people who ate there, though. He felt more comfortable at a small cafe or IHOP. At 10 o'clock that morning, Pete pushed back from his desk, straightened up the few papers left, and decided he had done enough for the day. He walked out of his office and stopped by his secretary's desk. He smiled at her and said, "Well, Penny, I'm off for the weekend. If anything urgent comes up that Joel can't handle, call my cell. I'm heading home to Van Buren. We have spotty cell service at home, so you might not be able to reach me unless you call my parents' house. Their number should be in my Rolodex." Around 1:45, Pete parked at Lambert's restaurant in Sikeston, Missouri. He looked at the busy parking lot and the wooden building. It reminded him of when he was young and the restaurant was much smaller. He smiled at the memories of family fun trying to catch the throwed rolls. He thought about driving to Van Buren without eating. He really wanted one of their meals, but he wasn't keen on waiting in line for a table. In the end, he decided to go in. When Cindy was with him, she always refused to stop at Lambert's because she thought it was too crowded with what she called trashy people. To Pete, they seemed like regular folks and tourists, but Cindy felt she was above mingling with them. Pete walked into the restaurant and joined the end of the line. Just as he arrived, a tour bus let off its passengers, who added to the line. The young man greeting customers said it would be about 15 minutes before he could sit down. Eventually, Pete was led to his table. Almost before he could read the menu, the servers brought around the extras that Lambert's was famous for. He enjoyed fried okra, brown beans, fried potatoes, and, of course, one of the famous throwed rolls. Pete was nearly full from the extras before his order arrived from the friendly waitress. He had ordered fried catfish and found himself eagerly waiting for his meal. This would be the first time in almost 3 years that he had enjoyed such down-home cooking, aside from the 2 holiday meals with his parents. Just seeing the good food on other tables made his mouth water. He really missed this kind of cooking. He listened to the people nearby talking. Many were tourists, but a few tables were locals enjoying their meal. He immersed himself in their conversations, which felt very different from what he heard in the city. People in rural America seemed more concerned about the weather and good crops than the latest fashion or new gadgets. When they talked about vehicles, it was usually trucks or farm equipment. To Pete, these were the real people, the heart of the community, and he missed them. He wondered when and how Cindy had drifted away from the values she had grown up with. Finally, Pete leaned back in his chair with a content sigh. He was stuffed and satisfied, enjoying the meal more than what he had at the restaurant Cindy preferred in St. Louis. The $40 or $60 that Pete spent on a meal there only got him a small plate of food, which often left him wanting more. He felt a bit cheated paying so much for so little. After finishing his $14 meal, he left a $4 tip. Just before 2 p.m., Pete drove out of the parking lot and headed toward Van Buren, where his family farm was by the Current River. When he reached Van Buren, he drove down the main street and pulled into a local hangout. Having changed into some old jeans and a shirt before leaving the bank, he felt comfortable as he walked inside. The bartender spotted Pete and called to him after he sat down. "What can I get you?" Leaning back in the booth, Pete replied without looking up, "Dos Equilager, please." The bartender grabbed a beer from the cooler and opened it. This simple moment showed how much Pete had adapted to city life, as he didn't think they might not have imported beer. The bartender came over to his table, set the beer down, and turned to go back to her spot behind the bar. Then she paused and looked back at Pete. "Pete Youngblood, is that you?" Surprised, Pete looked at her. She seemed familiar, but he couldn't remember where he had seen her. She wore faded jeans with a few holes and a worn white t-shirt with a funny saying on it. She looked tired, her complexion pale, and her hair was a dull, dirty blonde cut just below her ears. Like many people, she had a bit more weight than usual. He noticed her fingers were stained from smoking. "Yeah, I'm Pete Youngblood. I'm sorry, but I can't remember you," he admitted. The bartender smiled and replied, "I get it. I'm not that unforgettable, but we went to school together. I was 2 years behind you. Our families lived a couple of miles apart, but we rode different buses." Pete thought back to the families near his home when he was growing up. There were 3 with girls around his age, but only one family had a different school bus route. He couldn't recall their names or faces. Finally, he said, "I still can't remember your name, but I think it was Fulkerson. Sorry." The woman looked around the bar. The 2 other customers were still nursing their drinks. She sat down across from Pete and said, "My first name's Ginny, Virginia Fulkerson. So how have you been, Pete? Didn't you marry Cindy Streeter? Is she with you?" "Yeah, I married Cindy. She is home in St. Louis. She couldn't come down this weekend, so I made the trip alone to see my family. I needed a break to think and unwind. I just can't seem to do that in St. Louis." Ginny smiled and replied, "I know what you mean. After I graduated, I did what most kids do and moved to the big city. I got married, but it didn't work out, so I divorced him quickly. We lived in Sikeston. I never made it to St. Louis. I disliked the town and struggled to find a good job, so I came back home. This job isn't the best, but I still live with my mom and work here during the day. We manage, and at least I'm home. How about you?" Pete looked around at the simple room and the old tables. The floor still had the yellow pine that was common after the early 1900s. The building felt worn. He said, "Oh, about the same. I finished college and stayed here. I work at a bank now." Pete and Ginny chatted for several minutes while she caught him up on local news and shared what some friends were up to. As business picked up, she went back to her place behind the bar. By 4 p.m., a waitress came in and recognized Pete. They exchanged greetings during her trips to check on customers. Just after 5 p.m., 3 loud, middle-aged men entered the bar, laughing and joking. They called out greetings to the waitress and Ginny before searching for a table. One of the men stopped, noticed Pete, and broke into a big grin before hurrying over. The man extended his hand and said, "Wow, Pete, it's been ages. What are you doing sitting here in the middle of the day? Is Cindy with you?" Pete smiled and stood up. He shook the man's hand and gave him a quick hug. Stepping back, he said, "Wow, Jack. How have you been? I haven't seen you since last fall. How are Emily and the kids?" "We're all doing well. The youngest is joining the Army after graduation this year. Sarah's kids are growing fast, and she's saying she can't keep them in clothes just like we used to. How long are you and Cindy in town? Can you come by to see Emily?" "No, probably not. I just came for the weekend to see my family and do some thinking. Cindy said she's too busy, so it's just me." Pete turned to greet the other 2 men and shook their hands too. These 3 men had been friends since first grade, all smiling brightly. They sat down next to the booth, and they began reminiscing and sharing stories about each other's lives. Finally, around 7:30 p.m., a very tipsy Pete was sharing his troubles with Cindy and Winona with his friends, who were only a little less drunk. Jack finished his beer and called out, "Hey, Paula, bring us another round. We have a problem to solve and we're out of drinks again." After Paula brought the drinks, Jack leaned back and looked at Pete. He said with a slurred voice, "Hey, Pete, what are you doing here when you have things to deal with back home? We need to find out if she's being unfaithful, then you can move on. I never thought Cindy would do something like that. Are you sure about this?" "I don't have proof, but I think something is off. I came home to figure things out. I need to catch her in the act or understand what's really going on. Even if she isn't being unfaithful, I can't take her behavior anymore. If she is, I will end things. If she's just changed into someone unkind, she needs to change her ways or I need to move on. I'm tired of how things are between us." Jack took out his phone and called someone. He said, "Hey, baby, I ran into Pete at the bar. He has a problem and we're heading back to St. Louis to help him." After listening, he added, "He thinks Cindy might be cheating. We're going to look into it and handle it if she is." Pete listened for a moment and then snatched the phone from Jack. He said, "Hold on. We're not going anywhere tonight but home." He spoke into the phone. "Hey, Em, it's Pete. I think we've all had too much to drink." Emily laughed and replied, "You think? So what's this about Cindy being unfaithful?" "Nothing much, Em. She's just been really difficult to deal with lately. She seems to treat me with less respect, and I've noticed some things that worry me. Jack is just talking because he's drinking." Pete listened, then said, "Yeah, I'm sorry, Emily." He ended the call and gave the phone back to Jack. He said, "Emily is coming to pick you guys up and take you home. I'll call Dad to let him know I'll be late and catch some sleep in my truck. I appreciate the help, but right now I need to think things through." Pete started sipping coffee after returning Jack's phone. About 20 minutes later, a petite woman in faded jeans and a shirt entered the building. Despite her simple outfit in the dim light, it was clear she was very attractive. She paused at the doorway, looked around, and smiled when she spotted Ginny pointing towards Pete, Jack, and their friends. The woman approached the table, hands on her hips, giving the four men a challenging look. She said, "Pete, what are you doing?" "I should have guessed the first thing you four would do when you got back together was drink. You're just as wild as you were in high school." Pete looked at Emily and made a face, then said, "Now, Emily, we weren't that bad. I'm sorry about tonight. Things just got a bit out of control." Emily looked over at Jack, Slim, and Dee Dee. She said, "Come on, you three. I promised Betsy and Dottie I would make sure you all got home safe." She smiled at Pete and said, "If you're feeling all right tomorrow, why not come by in the afternoon? We can chat. Betsy and Dottie will be there, too." After Emily left with her friends, Pete wobbled outside to his truck. He lay down in the back seat for a little while before deciding to give it a go and sit in the front. He waited until he saw the town marshal drive by, then started his truck and carefully backed out of his spot. He drove slow and steady out of town and the 5 miles to his parents' farm. He parked and moved cautiously into the house. Sitting on the couch, he took off his boots, then lay down and pulled his legs up. He was asleep almost before he felt comfortable. Pete woke up the next morning to a loud voice. He sat up quickly and almost knocked his head against the coffee cup his mother was handing him. She glared at him and said, "Honestly, Pete, I already heard what you and those friends of yours were doing last night. I don't know what you're thinking. Breakfast is almost ready, so wash up and come to the kitchen." At breakfast, Pete's parents asked him questions until he shared a brief version of what happened the night before and why he was home without Cindy. His mother listened closely while he spoke and stayed quiet after he finished. After they all finished eating, she cleared the table and brought everyone another cup of coffee. Pauline sipped her coffee, glancing at Pete's father before looking back at him. "Son, I'm not sure what to say. We all cared for Cindy like she was our own daughter when you were growing up and even after you married. Still, I worry something is bothering her now. She has changed in the past few years, and some things she said when she was here have been hurtful. I can't fix this for you, but we are here for you if you need us. It's truly sad. I've also been concerned about Winona. That girl has a sharp tongue that just won't quit. There were times I almost lost my temper with her comments. I'm sorry to hear about what happened with that nice Jerrod boy, too. We really liked him that time he was here for Thanksgiving with all of you. Pete spent the morning at home with his parents, catching up and reconnecting. After lunch, he relaxed for about an hour before heading over to Jack's place to see his friends. When he arrived, he was surprised to see so many cars in the yard. Pete walked into the backyard and paused to take in the crowd. Jack approached him and handed him a drink. Pete asked, "What's going on? I thought it would just be you, Slim, and Dee Dee with their families." Jack frowned and replied, "Well, I guess we were a bit loud last night at the bar. A couple of ladies called Em this morning to chat, and she mentioned you were back and some of the things going on with Cindy. Things just kind of escalated, and now we have a full yard. But don't worry, they're all your friends, Pete." Pete spent the rest of the afternoon catching up with friends he hadn't seen in years, as well as some he hadn't seen since he was last home about 6 months ago. Even though he had to answer questions and listen to advice about Cindy, he really enjoyed his day and felt relaxed. The tension in his body began to ease, and a sense of calm settled in. Jack's house was beside the same stream as Pete's parents' home. They listened to the kids playing in the water and enjoyed the soothing sound of the stream flowing over the rocks. It felt cooler in the shade next to the stream compared to other places. After most of the guests left, Pete, Jack, Slim, Dee Dee, and their wives sat in chairs and looked out over the stream. They were sipping iced tea and relaxing when Emily spoke up. She turned to Pete and said, "Pete, I can't believe Cindy would be unfaithful. I know she can be difficult, always wanting to be the center of attention. She often tried to fit in with people she thought were better off. I just don't see her as a cheater. But I understand why you're upset about how she's acting and how she raised Winona. You should think this through before making any decisions." Pete looked across the stream and said, "Yeah, I remember how she was in school. I almost lost her in college because she wanted to fit in with a sorority and be with the wealthy kids. The best thing that happened to us was when they didn't accept her. She always blamed her part-time job for that." Pete chuckled and continued. "She was so embarrassed about having to work when the girls she wanted to be with didn't. It's even worse now. She won't talk to many of our old friends in town since we joined the country club. I'm worried that if she hasn't been unfaithful yet, it might just happen eventually. Honestly, I'm at a point where I almost don't care anymore. If she doesn't change her attitude, I think I will let her go. I can't keep dealing with this anymore. It's getting to the point where I feel more uneasy at home than I do at work. A man should be able to relax in his own house, right?" The friends chatted for a couple of hours, then Pete went back to his parents' house for the night. The next morning, they all had breakfast and spent time together until after another one of his mother's delicious lunches. Around 4 in the afternoon, Pete reluctantly left to return to St. Louis. He felt better after reconnecting with his friends and seeing his parents, but he still didn't have a clear solution to his issues with Cindy. At least he had decided he would either get her to improve or end the marriage. Pete took his time driving back and stopped at Lambert's for another meal. He arrived home after 7 p.m. to find, to his surprise and disappointment, that Cindy was gone again. He came in and dropped his overnight bag on the bed. After looking for a note from Cindy and finding none, he went out to the patio, sat down in a chair, and had a beer while he thought. Once he finished his beer, he got into his truck and drove over to the country club. He walked into the bar and ordered a drink. While waiting for it, he looked around the room. To his dismay, he saw Cindy sitting at a table with Saul, laughing and talking with him and 2 other couples. Saul had his arm casually resting on the back of her chair. From where he sat, Pete noticed that Cindy was wearing a lightweight blouse that was unbuttoned a bit too low for his comfort. He took a few pictures while they were at the table and a couple more when they moved to the dance floor. They weren't doing anything overtly wrong, but Cindy was allowing Saul too much closeness for Pete's liking. She seemed to pay more attention to him than she did when they talked now. She even looked at Saul with admiration, a look Pete hadn't seen from her in a long time. After drinking 3 shots of scotch, Pete went home. He had made a decision. He would hire someone to watch Cindy for a couple of weeks to see what she was really doing. He was becoming convinced that the marriage was over. After the surveillance, if she wasn't being faithful, he would definitely go for a divorce. If she was not cheating, he would demand she change her behavior, or he would file for divorce. Pete didn't know when Cindy came home that night. He was fast asleep when she came in and didn't hear her get into bed. The next morning, he didn't try to be quiet while getting ready for work. He was drinking coffee when Cindy walked into the kitchen. She shot him an annoyed look before silently pouring herself a cup of coffee. Cindy leaned against the counter while drinking her coffee and watched Pete. Finally, he put his cup down on the table and looked her in the eyes. He said, "Where were you yesterday? I waited until after 10 at night and you never came home. I couldn't find a note telling me where you were, and you didn't answer your phone. I got bored waiting for you to come back from your trip, so I went to the club. At least there I could talk to some interesting people. That's more than I can say about what you did this weekend. Did you have your fun for a while now?" Pete shook his head and stood up. He glanced at Cindy for a moment before turning away without saying anything. He walked to the garage, got into his truck, and drove to work. On the way, he thought again about how much Cindy had changed. He felt sad about what he had lost. When Pete arrived at work, he called a few friends to get information on private investigators. He called 3 and set up appointments for the next 2 days. On Wednesday, Pete hired the investigator he felt the most comfortable with and waited to see what they would find. He made sure they knew he wanted to confirm if Cindy was being unfaithful and also understand her feelings about him and their marriage. He asked for recordings of conversations if possible, hoping to get to the root of their problems. Pete felt that part of the problem was her lack of respect for him and others like them. 2 weeks and 3 days later, Pete was back in their office. This time he was there to receive their findings. After the usual greetings, the investigator settled back in his chair, folded his hands on his stomach, looked at Pete, and said, "Mr. Youngblood, I'm not sure what to tell you." Pete felt himself tense up. His face tightened and he began to speak, but the investigator raised his hand to pause him. "We have the report for you, and I know what it shows," he said quickly. "I just have a feeling we might be missing something. I've done hundreds of investigations, and this one is unusual. We didn't catch your wife being unfaithful, if that helps. However, we did see her in some situations that would make me uncomfortable if she were my wife. She shared a few quick kisses with some men from the country club, which felt more like the kind you give to friends or family instead of a romantic partner. The men occasionally touched her, but she did ask them to stop. What worries me more is her attitude and the conversations she had. She clearly looks down on you and others she thinks are beneath her. She strongly disapproves of your friends and the way you enjoy your free time. She seems quite pleased that she broke up your daughter and her fiancé and is very happy about the young man Winona is with now. I feel like, sir, you should know that this is just my gut feeling, but I think she is trying to convince herself that she would be happier without you. She has said several times to her friends that she feels great when she can get away from you. She talks a lot about a Saul Witherspoon and seems to admire him. He is also the person she has spent the most time with over the past 2 weeks. Most of her time away from home is with her female friends, at work, or volunteering. As you asked, we followed her to work and to her charity meetings but couldn't really know what happened in her office or the private meetings. We did send people to check on her under fake business pretenses when she was at work. Everything seemed normal. It is quite hard to carry on a relationship during a short workday unless you meet up later. She didn't do that, but she did meet her friends from the club after work. One Friday night, she came back to town and met some co-workers at a bar after her shift. Sir, as I mentioned, we have not seen your wife with anyone else. There is some evidence that might suggest a close friendship with Mr. Witherspoon if you want to see it that way. I think she might be tempted to take it further. She seems attracted to people she sees as being more socially respected and successful than you. We also found it strange that she often left home just before you got back from work. It seems almost like she was avoiding you." Pete sighed and leaned back in his chair. He said, "Thank you, I guess. It's good to know she hasn't been unfaithful. At least, not that we know of. I already noticed the lack of respect. This information just makes it harder to decide what to do. I assume you have the report and recordings I asked for?" The investigator replied, "Yes, sir," and handed a large envelope to Pete. "Everything is in there. Our fee includes 1 court appearance if needed." Pete stood, shook the investigator's hand, and left the room feeling down. Once he returned to his office, he read through some of the conversations Cindy had with her friends. He sat back in his chair and put his feet on his desk, thinking about his life and marriage. Pete took a deep breath, pushed his chair back, and grabbed his phone. He looked through his contacts and dialed a number. When someone picked up, he said, "This is Pete Youngblood. May I speak with Forrest Dameron, please?" After a short wait, Pete smiled and replied, "Good to hear from you, too. Yes, I have it. It's not as bad as I thought, but it's still not great. I can't deal with it anymore. Go ahead and file the papers we discussed. I don't mind. We'll each keep our retirement savings, and she can have the house. I never wanted it anyway. Please include her country club membership, too. I'll bring the report later today. Take care." At 2 o'clock, Pete left the office with the investigator's report in hand. He walked 2 blocks and entered another building. A cheerful receptionist greeted him warmly, saying, "Good afternoon, Mr. Youngblood. Are you here to see Mr. Dameron?" Pete nodded and replied, "Yes, I am, Sally." She quickly made a phone call to announce him. After hanging up, she flashed another smile at Pete. While they waited, Pete chatted with Sally until his friend and lawyer, Forrest Dameron, came to greet him. They walked to the office, and Pete handed Forrest the surveillance report. Forrest quickly looked over the papers and set them on his desk. He glanced at Pete and said, "Pete, I have to ask if you are really sure this is what you want. The report suggests Cindy hasn't been unfaithful. It sounds more like there's been some disrespect and tension. If every couple who struggled got divorced, we'd have a lot more breakups. Have you thought about seeing a counselor? It might help." "I understand, Forrest. I did think about counseling, but I don't feel like there's a marriage worth saving. I'm really at my limit. We just don't get along anymore. Sure, I don't want to lose what I will probably lose, but I just want it to end. I feel really anxious about going home now. I never know if she'll be upset or even there at all. I just don't love her anymore, and I want it to be over." "You know what you want," Forrest said. He took out a pen and a legal pad, switching to complete lawyer mode. They spent the next 30 minutes going over the petition and possible property arrangements. They even talked about what Cindy and her lawyer might argue. Pete headed home, and since he was early, he caught Cindy by surprise as she was getting into her car. She watched him closely as he pulled into the garage next to her. Just as she was about to get into her car, he jumped out and called out, "Cindy, wait! I need to talk to you before you go." Cindy hesitated for a moment. It looked like she might ignore him and drive away, but finally she closed her door and walked around to meet him at the entrance of the house. She followed him inside the kitchen. Pete poured himself a glass of water and sat down at the table. He pulled out a chair for Cindy, and she sat down slowly. She rested her arms on the table and held her hands together. Pete took a sip of water and looked at her. She was dressed nicely, and he noticed she seemed a bit tense. He said, "Cindy, I have to tell you something important. You need to find a lawyer. I've asked Forrest to start the divorce process today. I can't keep living in this unhappy situation anymore. It seems you don't love me anymore, and it feels like you don't respect me either. I've reached my limit. I've tried to be fair about dividing our things. You can keep the house and the country club membership. I'll take my share in the investments. We'll each keep our retirement savings, no alimony, and we'll split everything else equally." Cindy stared at Pete, shocked. Anger quickly spread across her face. Her eyes flashed, and she replied, "I'm not surprised. Saul and some of my friends told me you might not fit in. I've spent the last 4 years trying to help you, but you've resisted at every turn. I almost gave up on you, too. I'll review the papers and let you know. Now, if you don't need anything else, I have to get to an appointment." Pete shook his head as he watched Cindy hurry from the kitchen to the garage. Tension knotted in his stomach. He took a deep breath and went to his room to change into shorts. He decided to skip the shirt. Stepping outside, he jumped into the pool to cool off. He swam a couple of laps and then floated on his back, eyes closed, trying to relax. After leaving Pete at home, Cindy headed straight to the country club. She was surprised at how happy she felt after their conversation, like a weight had been lifted. When she arrived, her friends were already there. She walked past the bar and ordered her usual drink to be sent to her at the table. She took her usual seat next to Saul and smiled at the others. Roberta remarked on how cheerful Cindy seemed that evening. Cindy looked up and smiled, then said, "You know, I'm surprised too. Pete came home early today and stopped me before I could leave. He told me he had started the process for divorce because he couldn't handle my efforts to make things better anymore. I should feel upset or sad, but all I feel is relief that it's done." If Cindy and Pete had seen the big smile on Saul's face or heard his excited yes when Cindy said Pete had filed, they might have been a bit surprised. After hearing Cindy's news, Saul stood up and headed toward the restrooms. As he walked, he took out his phone and called a friend to share the news about Cindy and Pete's breakup. 2 days later, Cindy was served with the divorce papers. Although she was still living in the house, she had moved to one of the guest suites. She hardly spoke to Pete. One evening, a week after he told her he was filing, she waited for him by her car in the garage. When he got out of his car, she said, "Pete, I had my lawyer look at the papers. There are some things I want to discuss. Can we have a meeting this week?" "Sure. I don't have any important meetings right now. Have your lawyer contact Forrest and set something up," Pete replied. Cindy looked at him for a moment. then got into her car and drove away. On the day of the meeting, to Pete's annoyance, Saul brought Cindy to the lawyer's office. Pete overheard Saul telling Cindy to be strong and not to give in easily. He reminded her to keep their previous discussions in mind. Pete shot him a glare as Saul passed by on his way to the meeting room, feeling even angrier at the satisfied look on Saul's face. Cindy was okay with the basic settlement but disagreed with the valuations for the house and country club membership. They suggested a much lower value that Pete would not accept. They also raised concerns about how some of the property was to be divided. In the end, they agreed to accept the average of 3 new appraisals. Each side would get 1 appraiser, and the third would be chosen randomly from a list. They also disputed the wording in parts of the settlement. It took nearly 2 hours to sort everything out. A week later, to Pete's joy and Cindy's dismay, the average of the 3 new appraisals came out much better for Pete. The house was valued at over $30,000 more, and the country club membership increased by $5,673. Once they signed the property settlement and divorce documents, they were filed with the court as an uncontested divorce. In Missouri, 30 days later, the divorce became final. On that day, Pete resigned from his job at the bank and gave his 2 weeks' notice. He had been living in a temporary lodge and hadn't even unloaded his truck or the large trailer he had bought for his things. After his last day at work, Pete packed the few clothes he had into his truck, hooked up the trailer, and set off for his childhood home. On his way back, Pete stopped for lunch at Lambert's. This time, he had the hamburger steak and enjoyed it a lot. When he returned to Van Buren, he moved back into his parents' home. They still had a large farm, and he helped his father with the work there for several weeks, doing tasks that his father either didn't have time for or needed a bit more strength to handle. Pete was taking a break and thinking about his life. He didn't hear from Cindy or Winona during that time. His son, who was in the service, called once, and they talked for a short while. Pete remembered the beginning of their conversation well. His son said, "Honestly, Dad, I'm surprised you waited this long. I would have ended things with Joni a long time ago if she treated me like Mom treated you. I'm sorry, but they were both really difficult, and you're better off without them." Pete wanted to press his son to explain more, but he wouldn't say anything further. Just from the way his son spoke, Pete felt sure that he suspected Cindy of being unfaithful, even without evidence. In the end, Pete decided it was best to let it go. Speculating about it didn't matter anymore. A divorce was a divorce. Finding out if she had been unfaithful would have just made him angry. He didn't hate Cindy, but he didn't want to see or talk about her ever again. After helping his father with the fall harvest, Pete began looking for a job. He had experience in the banking industry, but didn't want to be a banker anymore. In the small town of Van Buren, there wasn't much demand for someone like him. One day, while visiting a friend who owned the local feed mill and farm store, his friend asked, "Don't you have a CPA certificate, Pete?" "Yeah, but I haven't used it in years. Once I moved into management at the bank, I did different kinds of work. I've kept up with my continuing education, though." "Why do you ask?" "Well, old man Stiles is looking to cut back in his business. His daughter works with him now, but he says he's too busy. I thought you might want to see if he needs some help." "I'm not sure. I didn't really enjoy being a CPA after getting my certification. Working with numbers all day became pretty dull quickly. Still, it might give me something to do and bring in some money. I suppose it couldn't hurt to talk to him." The next day, Pete visited Mr. Stiles at the accounting office. He almost had to struggle to leave when he told him what he wanted to discuss. Finally, they came to an agreement. Pete was clear that he didn't want to be involved in the everyday operations of the office. He agreed to work on tax returns during tax season and take care of any returns due outside of January through April for those who had different reporting dates. That year, Pete's son Randy was home from the Navy for Christmas. They were outside, talking and enjoying a big meal that Pete's mother had made. Randy turned to Pete and asked, "Do you talk to Mom now?" "No, I haven't seen or talked to her since we discussed our divorce. I'm sorry, son, but I don't want to see her or talk about her." "I get it, Dad, but I think you should know something. Mom was really into the country club and her friends there. She thought they were great. But after the divorce, most of them left her. One night, She ran into Saul at the bar and he really upset her. She thought Saul was a good friend. He owned a big construction company and built most of the nice houses around the club. One evening, he and his friends were making jokes about the divorce and how easy Mom was to influence. Saul doesn't like you, Dad, and he doesn't think much of Mom either. She said they were trying to come between you two. Your bank turned down Saul's loan before the divorce, and he blamed you for that. He had to join forces with another company to stay afloat, and has held a grudge ever since. He tried to charm Mom, but she insists she never cheated on you. After working on her for a while, she started to see you differently. Once the divorce was done, he tried again, but gave up when she wouldn't respond. Then he started saying bad things about her, and many of her friends stopped talking to her. Now, she and Winona aren't very popular in town either. They mostly just work and go home. Losing the baby really affected Winona. You were right about that guy she dated after Jerrod. He left her as soon as he found out she was pregnant. Are you sure you're handling things right with Winona? A baby? I didn't even know Winona was expecting. This is the first I've heard of it. When did she lose the baby? Why didn't anyone tell me? She miscarried in November, Dad. I don't know why they didn't tell you, but maybe it was because of some things you said while you were home. Well, I still love your sister. I don't always respect her choices, but she is my daughter and I care about her. I called a couple of times to see if I could visit her or meet her before I came back home, but she said no, so I stopped trying. I don't go to St. Louis anymore, so I can't just drop by. I've sent her cards for her birthday and the holidays, inviting her to come see me here. There's not much more I can do, son. Next time you see her, please tell her she's always welcome here, and we really do want to see her. Pete's life moved on like most lives do. He was happier than ever in St. Louis. He went to work in blue jeans, cowboy boots, and flannel shirts in the winter. In summer, he wore shorts and short-sleeve shirts if he even went into the office. Almost every day, he stopped by the local cafe and bar to hang out with the guys. He reconnected with his friends and became close with them again, just like before he left for college. He spent many enjoyable days hunting and fishing during the seasons. Pete was also glad to understand what had happened with his marriage. He realized some of the problems were because of Cindy's strong personality. She liked to be in charge. He was relieved to know some of it was caused by someone who was small-minded and resentful. At times, he thought about going back to St. Louis to confront Saul, but in the end, he felt it wasn't worth it. Even before Saul got involved, living with Cindy had been difficult. Saul just took advantage of that. Pete occasionally spent time with Ginny or other women who went to the local bar. He told his friends it wasn't the same as being with someone he loved, but it helped ease his feelings. He probably went out with someone 2 or 3 times a month and was careful to be safe. He joked once that it was nearly as much as he had shared with Cindy in the year before they divorced. Most of the time, he spent time alone. Emily and his other female friends tried to set him up with different people, but so far, Pete hadn't found anyone he was really interested in. It had been almost 2 years since his divorce, and Pete was getting used to his life now. Some things were good, some great. The only downside was that he missed having someone to love and spend time with. Life goes on. Pete could be happier, but he was definitely much better off than he had been in the last few years with Cindy. Pete sat in a small park by the current river. His mind felt clear. He listened to the sounds of laughing children as they played. The conversations around him created a soft background to the noise of the kids. He watched the children run and play and smiled at their joy. Their laughter and cheerful shouts took him back to when his children were small, playing in this same park. He and Cindy had brought them here for similar 4th of July celebrations. The years had flown by. He remembered being a kid, enjoying community picnics and festivities in this park. Just last month, he celebrated his 46th birthday and wondered where all the time had gone. Emily came over and sat in one of the chairs he had set up earlier. Jack and their children, now grown, walked up just behind her. Pete smiled at them and said, "I was starting to think you got lost. Where are Slim, Dee Dee, and their friends?" Jack laughed and replied, "We almost did. I swear the traffic and the crowd seem worse every year. Maybe next year I'll skip the parade like you did and just enjoy the view here. You can see most of the parade since it ends close by." Emily playfully nudged Jack's arm and said, "You know you wouldn't do that. You have to see the grandkids in the parade." She smiled brightly and waved, calling out, "Hey everyone, we're here." Jack and Pete turned to see the rest of their friends approaching. Once everyone settled with their chairs and coolers, the laughter and chatting began in earnest. Emily looked at Pete and asked, "So, what's this I hear about Randy? Is it true?" Pete beamed and said, "Yes, I just got back from Pensacola a couple of days ago. He's now an ensign in the Navy. I knew he was taking night classes for years, and I was thrilled when he finally graduated. The little rascal didn't tell me he was accepted into officers' candidate school until a week before his commissioning. I had to rush to get there for the ceremony. I have pictures from the day, including Joni pinning on his new rank. It took him almost 9 years to finish his degree and get the commission. I couldn't be prouder. Joni is bursting with pride, too. I was already proud of him for becoming a chief petty officer in 8 years, but this is even better. What does Cindy think about it?" Pete looked at Emily, his expression pained. He sighed and said, "I honestly don't know. She seemed too busy to attend the commissioning. Randy called to invite her but got no answer. He left a message, but she never came or even called him back. As of the commissioning date, he hadn't heard from her at all." Emily's face fell. She gently touched Pete's arm and said, "Oh, Pete, I'm really sorry to hear that. I didn't mean to bring up bad memories, but it's hard to believe Cindy would treat her own son like this. I know he's really hurt by what she did. The next time you see him, make sure to tell him how proud we are of him and offer him our congratulations." Pete nodded and turned to watch the officials guiding the old cars from the parade to their parking spots. Soon, he would check out all the classic cars and trucks. He was working on restoring a 1967 Chevelle Supersport, which was a dream he'd had since he was young. He always wanted one but couldn't afford it back then. Now that he could, he was excited to make it happen. After lunch, Pete grabbed a drink and wandered around. He visited several booths before heading to the car show. As he walked through the show, he spotted a faded 1967 Malibu parked under a tree on the back row. Next to it was a woman in her early 40s who looked quite attractive. Pete moved closer to the car and leaned in, careful not to touch it. It had a 283 cubic inch engine and bucket seats. It seemed to be in great shape and showed no signs of having been restored or damaged. He smiled at the woman watching him and said, "This car looks amazing. It really seems like a survivor. You've done a great job cleaning it up. I always dreamed of having a car like this, although I wanted the SS version. There was a family in town that had one when I was a kid. I would watch it drive by and feel so jealous. I haven't seen you around here before. Did you come from far away?" The woman smiled back and stood up. She walked over next to Pete and said, "No, I live here now. From what you said, I bet this is the car you admired when you were younger. It was my father's. I moved back last fall to teach at the school. I'm living with my mother and the old car was still in the garage. She hadn't used it in years. After my father passed away, she kept it because she couldn't let it go, even though she had her own car for daily use. I wanted something to keep me busy and take my mind off things when I got home, so I started working on cleaning up the old car. Once I got it all cleaned and running, my mom gave it to me." Pete grinned and said, "Becky, is that you, Becky Livingston? Wow, I haven't seen you since I left for college. You've changed a lot." The woman looked at Pete and smiled again. She nodded and said, "Yep, that's me. I used to be anyway. I got married to Sherman Potter and kept that name after our divorce." "Wow, I shouldn't be surprised," Pete said, stumbling over his words. "I mean, not recognizing you. Not about the divorce, I'm sorry about that. I can only imagine how hard that was. You were still in junior high when I left home." "Hey, are you around 37 or 38 now?" Becky chuckled and placed her hand softly on Pete's arm. With a warm smile, she replied, "You're quite the smooth talker. I just turned 40 in June." Pete quickly shifted the topic back to cars. "I understand what you mean about finding ways to fill your time. I moved back home a bit over 2 years ago after my divorce. The first 6 months were tough. I spent a lot of time helping my dad on the farm, feeling sorry for myself, and not taking care of myself. After talking to my mom and a couple of my friends' wives, I decided I needed to do something productive. I didn't want a full-time job, and I didn't want to just sit around, so I found a part-time job doing taxes at the Stiles accounting firm. I also bought my dream car to work on during my free time. I'm halfway through restoring a '67 Chevelle SS. It even has the original parts. Wow, that sounds awesome. She looked around, a bit puzzled, then asked, "Where is it? I didn't see it among the cars earlier." Pete smiled and replied, "It's at home. The inside still needs some work, and I haven't painted the outside yet. But it's running perfectly, and the frame has been powder-coated. I've put some of the body back on the frame, but there's still a lot to do before I show it to anyone. In fact, the fenders, grille, hood, and trunk lid are still on the floor." Pete spent more than an hour talking with Becky before he knew he had to get back to his friends. As he stood up to leave, he paused for a moment and said, "I'm still living with my parents right now. They could use the help. I haven't found a place in town yet. I'm working on the car in the shop at their place. If you ever want to come out, I would love to show it to you." Becky smiled brightly. "I'd really like that. Are you free on Saturday? We can do a show until then." "Absolutely. I'll probably be working on the car. Just come on out. You know how to get to my place, right?" Becky laughed. "Come on, Pete. Your family has been here as long as mine has. If I forget, I can always ask my mom for directions." Pete chuckled. "Yeah, you're right. I know where you live, so I guess you'd know where I live too. See you on Saturday." Just as Pete was walking away, he heard Becky call out, "Hey, Pete." He turned back to her. She had her phone ready and asked, "What's your number in case I need to call? Do you have a cell? I guess I could call your house." Pete smiled. "Oh, I didn't even think of that. It's 3,142,677,778 inches." Becky thanked him as she added the number to her phone. Pete started to ask for her number when his phone rang. It rang twice and then stopped. He looked at the number but didn't recognize it, so he put it back in his pocket. He was about to ask Becky for her number again when she said, "There. Now you have my number if you need me." "Oh, I'm just a bit slow, I guess. I didn't recognize it and was going to ask for yours too," Pete replied, looking confused. "I suppose I'm not very good at this number exchange thing. Sorry." Becky chuckled and said, "I hadn't noticed. You seemed pretty eager to invite me over, and it looks like you have a good reason to." Pete felt embarrassment wash over him, and he turned away quickly, saying, "Well, I need to go. See you Saturday." As he walked away, Becky frowned, wondering if she had said something wrong. When Pete returned to his friends, Emily exclaimed, "There he is. We thought we had to look for you. What happened? Did a girl charm you?" Pete blushed again. He stammered, "No, I was just checking out old cars and talking with some owners." Dee Dee noticed Pete's red face and laughed. "Whoa, who is she? Look at his face, everyone. I think Pete's been flirting with someone. Come on, you can tell us." "Listen, I wasn't flirting. I just bumped into Becky Livingston at the car show. She has her dad's old Chevelle and we chatted about cars. That's it." The three women exchanged knowing smiles. Dottie, the youngest, said, "Pete, be careful with Becky. She's doing better now, but she has been through a lot. Do you know what happened to her?" "No, what do you mean?" "She and Sherman Potter had twins. When they were 16, her son had a car accident on the way to school. His sister was in the front seat and got thrown from the car. She didn't survive. Sherman couldn't cope with everything and blamed Becky for the accident. He thought she should have kept them from driving. That led to him hurting her. After he injured her badly for the third time, she reported him and divorced him. He went to prison and she moved back home. She doesn't socialize much anymore and has only a few friends. Her son joined the army, so they don't see each other often." "Oh, she didn't mention any of that. Just that she was divorced and worked on her car to keep busy." The next evening, Pete was at the grocery store picking up some things for his mother when he saw Becky with a fragile-looking older woman. Their shopping cart was already half full. He guessed the woman was Becky's mother. After a moment's hesitation, he walked up and said, "Hi, Becky. How are you doing?" Becky's head turned quickly. She looked surprised, then smiled when she saw Pete. She said, "Hi, Pete. You surprised me." She pointed to the older woman with her and added, "Do you remember my mom, Irma? Mom, this is Pete Youngblood." The three talked for a little while. Then Pete said, "I really need to go. Mom asked me to pick up some things she needs for dinner." He looked at Becky and continued, "Are you still coming to see the old car in the morning? I'll probably be in the shop around 8:30 or 9 o'clock. Are you sure it won't be a bother? I would love to see it if I'm not in the way. No, I'd love to show it to you if you're really interested. Pete had only been working on the old car for a few minutes when he heard a car driving on the gravel driveway. He looked up and smiled. Not only was Becky here, but she had driven her old 67. He walked out to greet her with a big smile. After they said hello, Becky walked past Pete to the garage. She paused about 5 feet from the front tire of his car, putting her hands on her hips. She inspected the car carefully, then leaned in to look through the driver's window. After checking the inside, she turned to face Pete. Becky smiled and said, "You have a lot of work ahead of you. I see what you mean about the inside. It really needs some work. What are you doing today?" "I'm sanding the body. In a couple of weeks, I hope to paint it so I can put everything back together and start on the inside. I'm getting excited to finish it and take it to shows." "That sounds great. Do you want some help? I think I can sand and I really want to learn. I want to repaint my old car as soon as I can find the money and someone to help me." Pete hesitated about her helping. Finally, she said, "Look, Pete, if I didn't want to help, I wouldn't have offered. I used to follow my dad around the garage when I was younger and learned a lot from him before he got sick. If you don't want me to help for some reason, that's fine. But if you're just being polite, forget it. I really do want to help." Pete felt a bit uneasy with Becky's strong response. He said, "Whoa, I'm sorry, Becky. I don't mind the help if you're serious. I just didn't want to take advantage of you." Becky smiled and said, "Okay then. What do you want me to do, boss?" Pete thought for a moment and then suggested a task for Becky. The two new friends worked quietly and carefully on the old car. They talked very little, mostly about the work. They were both surprised when Pete's mother walked into the garage. She said, "Pete, what's going on with you? I've called you 3 times now for lunch." She looked at Becky with surprise and then said, "Well, who is this? Hi, I'm Pete's mother, Pauline. Would you like to join us for lunch? I made plenty. We're having fried chicken and all the sides today. I always prepare a lot." Becky introduced herself and replied, "Thank you for the invitation, but I couldn't impose on you like that. Besides, I really should be heading home. I only planned to come see the old car, and I got caught up helping." After a short conversation, Pauline convinced Becky to stay for lunch. They all enjoyed a nice talk over the meal, and to Pauline's surprise, Becky insisted on helping with the cleanup afterward. Pete and his father sat in the living room, listening to the sounds of women chatting and occasional laughter coming from the kitchen. Pete's father looked at him and said, "You be careful there, son. That girl has been through a lot. She doesn't need any more pain right now." "Yeah, I know, Dad. Emily and the others filled me in. I just saw her again on July 4th, and she wanted to check out my old car. I think she needed something to keep her occupied today. She's worried about her mother and still dealing with her daughter's accident and the divorce. I guess I'll head back to the shop for a while." Pete was sanding the car again when he heard a sound. He looked up and saw Becky working on the project she had before lunch. He watched her for a moment before getting back to his work. Before long, they had finished all the sanding on the sheet metal. He stood up with a stretch and put down his sanding block. Becky also finished the fender she was working on and stood up. Pete looked around and stretched his back. He clapped his hands together and dusted off his jeans. He walked over to the old refrigerator by the open garage door and opened it. He glanced at Becky and asked, "Do you want something to drink? I have soda or unsweetened tea." "What are you going to have?" "Soda." "Great. That sounds good. I'll have one too, please." Pete and Becky took their cold drinks outside and sat under the big tree beside the driveway. Pete looked out over the river and stretched his legs out in front of him. He sighed and said, "Thanks for your help today. I thought it would take me at least until next weekend to finish the sanding. I'm almost ready to paint a week earlier than I expected, all thanks to you." "I really enjoyed it, Pete. I didn't think once about—" Becky stopped, pressing her lips together. Pete noticed tears in her eyes. She shook her head and let out a soft sigh. Pete thought for a moment. He wasn't sure what to say or do. Finally, he decided to say, "Becky, I heard. I was told about your daughter and your husband. I'm really sorry. I know this might not help much, and I don't fully understand what you are going through, but I can relate to some of it. My life has been tough, too. I had to end my marriage with Cindy, and I lost my daughter because she chose to side with her. She won't talk to me anymore. I know it's not exactly the same, but it feels similar. If you want to talk, I'm here to listen." Becky sat in her chair, quietly crying. Pete felt unsure of what to do. Finally, he stood up and walked over to her, placing his hand on her shoulder. She turned to him and rested her head against his side as her body shook with sadness. After a moment, Becky stood up without looking at Pete. She spoke softly. "I need to go, Pete. Thanks for today. I had a really nice time. And please thank your mom for the great lunch. I need to get home and check on my mom." Pete watched as Becky drove away. For some reason, he felt really down. It hurt him to see her upset, and he felt a sense of responsibility, as if he had done something wrong. The next Thursday afternoon, Pete answered his phone. It was Becky. "Hi, Pete. Are you working on your car this Saturday? If you are, could I help? I had such a good time last weekend, and I'd love to join you again." Pete chuckled and replied, "Do I look that silly? Getting free help from a nice and pretty friend? Of course, come over. I'll start around the same time, and I'll let my mom know you're coming for lunch, too." "Oh, no, I couldn't do that. I can just go home or bring something," Becky said. Pete laughed again. "No way. I won't let you get me in trouble with my mom. If you're helping, you're staying for lunch." Becky giggled. Okay. If you insist, I'll see you Saturday morning." On that Saturday, the two friends worked on the old car together. They took out everything from the inside, including some dashboard instruments. They removed the weather stripping from the windows and doors and pulled out all the inside trim. They sanded down rough spots, and Pete used a small sandblaster to get rid of stubborn rust. Soon he was ready to prime the inside metal for painting. On Wednesday morning, Pete decided it was time to take the upholstery to the shop. He had to go to Poplar Bluff and didn't want to go alone, so he called Becky and invited her to come along. She sounded surprised and a bit taken aback. After a moment of silence, she replied, "Okay. When are you leaving?" "As soon as I pick you up. I've already loaded everything in my truck. Is that all right?" "But I have to shower and get dressed." "I can't," Becky started to say. Pete cut in. "Becky, unless you've been doing something really messy, you don't need to shower. And you don't need to dress up for this. We're just going to an auto shop. People are used to seeing others in work clothes. I've seen you in them too. What's the fuss? If you need time, I can wait, but if you're ready, then it's fine to wear what you have on. I'm in my work clothes." "Okay, but, Beck, you can do whatever feels right. I'll be in my work clothes since I'll be unloading and getting dirty anyway. Do you need more time or should I come over?" "Okay, I'll be ready when you arrive. I'm sorry." "No need to apologize, Beck. See you soon." Pete picked Becky up quickly, and they were on their way. She wore the same faded jeans and shirt she had on when they worked on her old car. When she saw Pete in his old frayed jeans, she relaxed and smiled. They quickly fell into easy conversation, and the miles passed swiftly. The drive was only about 44 miles, so they barely got a good chat going before they reached the upholstery shop. By noon, they finished their business. Pete turned to Becky and asked where she wanted to eat. She looked surprised and said, "Oh, we don't have to eat here. We can be home by 1 or 1:30 and I can eat there." "No, I enjoy my mom's cooking, but I was hoping to grab a pizza or something. I haven't had a good pizza in a while." Becky smiled widely and replied, "That sounds great. Pizza is one of my favorites, and I don't have it often enough either. Let's get one." They ordered a large Super Supreme pizza and finished it all before leaving. They talked and laughed during the meal. It was after 2 p.m. when Pete settled the bill, after a little debate with Becky, and they headed home. By now, it was a routine that Becky would come to Pete's house every Saturday morning to help restore his old car. They worked together and became closer friends over the summer. The car was almost finished. The Saturday that Pete planned to finally start attaching the hood, grill, fenders, and trunk lid arrived, but to his surprise, Becky didn't show up. He waited 30 minutes past her usual time before deciding to call her. The phone rang a long time before it went to voicemail. He left a message and got back to work, feeling he really could use her help that day. He only managed to do small tasks and worried about Becky. Finally, around noon, she called. He could tell she was upset. She apologized for not telling him she wouldn't come. With a sniffle, she said, "Mom's in the hospital in Poplar Bluff. I'm sorry I didn't call you. She fell in the shower this morning and broke her leg and pelvis. She is still unconscious. Oh, Pete, I'm so scared. I'm sorry for not updating you." "No problem, Becky. I understand. Is there anything I can do?" "No, I'm fine, but thanks." Pete continued working for about 10 more minutes after the call. Pete was struggling to focus on his work. Eventually, he closed up the shop and locked the door. He went inside the house and took a shower. Dressed in comfortable sports clothes, Pete entered the kitchen where his mother was preparing lunch. She looked at him with a curious expression. He said, "Mom, Becky called. Her mother is in the hospital. She fell this morning and is hurt pretty badly. I'm going to the bluff to be with her." Pauline smiled and looked at Pete with understanding. She replied, "Please tell her we are sorry and to let us know if there's anything we can do. You take care, son." Pete drove the 49 miles to the hospital in Poplar Bluff in 40 minutes, keeping within the speed limit. It was a good time considering he had to navigate through the towns. When Pete arrived at the hospital, he had some trouble locating Becky. After a while, he decided to call her since the hospital wouldn't provide information about her mother's room. When he entered the room, Becky got up quickly from her chair and came over to him. She hugged him tightly and said, "Pete, you didn't have to come. We will be okay. But thank you for being here." Pete looked at the woman in the hospital bed. She looked pale, with many bruises and medical equipment around her. He asked, "How is she doing?" Becky pressed her lips together and shook her head sadly. Then she said, "She lost a lot of blood from her injuries. She has a serious concussion, too. I can't say for sure how much she wants to keep going. She's felt very lonely since Dad passed away, and since—" Becky began to cry. After a moment, she continued, "When my daughter died, and with my divorce, she just seemed to lose hope. I just don't know." Pete stayed with Becky for the rest of the day. There were small changes in her mother's condition, but they weren't good. Pete went out to grab another pizza for dinner, and they ate it together in the waiting room. Since Becky's mother was in intensive care, they could only visit her for short periods. The rest of the time, they sat in the ICU waiting room. They were resting on a small couch when a doctor came to speak with them. Becky looked up at the doctor, and she already knew. She started crying before the doctor even had a chance to say that her mother had passed away. She turned to Pete and hugged him tightly, shaking with her tears. Pete wrapped his arm around her, holding her gently while he kissed the top of her head and rubbed her back softly. Finally, Becky looked up at the doctor and whispered, "Thank you for everything, doctor. What should I do now?" "We have all the information we need, Miss Potter. You can have the funeral home come to pick up your mother any time after 8 tomorrow morning." He placed a comforting hand on Becky's shoulder for a moment and said, "I'm really sorry for your loss." Then he turned and walked quickly back down the hallway, disappearing from sight. Pete held Becky close for a little while longer and then said, "Come on, let's get you home. We can handle everything else tomorrow after you've had some rest." Pete didn't ask for her input. He drove straight to his parents' house and parked the truck. Becky, who had been sleeping, woke up when he stopped. She looked around and asked, "Pete, why are we at your parents' house? I can stay alone. It's fine." "No, Becky, it's not fine. You shouldn't be alone right now, and I don't want you to be alone. Come on, you can use my bed and I'll take the couch. We both need to get some sleep." If Pete's parents heard them when they came inside, they didn't check on him. He helped Becky into his room, grabbed a blanket, and settled onto the couch. He didn't sleep very well and finally got up around 5:30 a.m. He was sitting on the back porch with his first cup of coffee when his mother came into the kitchen. She poured herself some coffee and joined Pete on the porch. They exchanged good mornings when, to his surprise, Becky appeared on the porch. Pete felt glad to see that she had managed to get herself a cup of coffee. His mother, Pauline, looked shocked and then recognized Becky. Becky's eyes were red and puffy. Her face showed signs of stress. Pauline said, "Becky, I didn't expect to see you here. Are you okay?" Becky bit her lower lip, trembling slightly. Pete quickly stood up and pulled her into a hug. She leaned into him, trembling. He turned to his mother and said, "Becky's mother passed away last night, Mom. I didn't want her to be alone, so I let her sleep in my room and I took the couch." Pauline jumped up from her chair and hugged Becky too. "Oh, you poor girl. You can stay here as long as you want. I'm so sorry I didn't know your mom well, but she seemed like a wonderful person." After a few moments, Pauline let go of Becky and went inside. Without thinking, Pete pulled Becky with him to sit in a glider. He held her in his lap while they sipped their coffee. About 30 minutes later, to Pete's surprise, his mother brought breakfast out to them. She set a small table in front of the glider and placed their plates on it. Becky didn't eat much, but Pete encouraged her to take a few bites. Once she had eaten what she could, Pete pulled her close again. They sat in silence for several moments before Becky gently pushed away from him. "I suppose I should get started. There's so much to do today." "Could you take me home now, Pete?" Pete stood up and put his arm around Becky, leading her to the kitchen. "Mom, Becky has a lot to do today. I'm taking her home now, and I might be gone all day to help her." Pauline smiled at Pete. "All right, son. Call if you need anything. We'll see you when you get back." During the day, Pete ran errands for Becky and went with her to meet with the funeral director. He also answered phone calls and welcomed visitors at her house. In small towns, when people hear about a loss, they often bring food and offer to help. Dottie spent part of the day with them. She and Becky had been friends in school, even though Dottie was 2 years older. That night, Pete insisted that Becky come to his house. After some hesitation, she agreed and let him take her home around 8:30 p.m. The next morning, he returned her home, encouraging her to get started on her day. Becky finally convinced him she could manage on her own and asked him to go. He invited her to stay with them again that evening, but she declined. Becky changed after her loss. For 2 weeks after the funeral, she felt down and did little to care for herself. Pete worried about her and called or visited each day, as did many of her friends. Slowly, she began to feel better. On the third Saturday after her mother passed, Becky showed up at Pete's house to help with the old car. Pete told her she didn't have to, but she replied, "Pete, I know I don't have to help. I want to. I need something to keep me busy. I almost came earlier this week but didn't want to intrude. Can I please just start working?" To Pete's surprise, she was almost smiling as she said this. "All right, fine. I've been eager to get it back together. I've finished what I could do alone. Do you want to help put the car back together today? Maybe we can even work on the inside soon and take it for a drive." They spent most of the day working and managed to put nearly all the body parts back. Becky agreed to return on Monday to finish up and start working on the interior. She was almost as excited as Pete was about completing it. Finally, in early August, Pete declared the car finished. He pulled it out of the shop and parked it under the tree where they often sat. Together, he and Becky admired the shining car. When it started running, his parents came out onto the porch. They all stood together, enjoying the deep rumble of the engine. After getting his parents' approval, Pete instinctively wrapped his arm around Becky's waist and pulled her close. He looked down at her and asked, "So do you want to take it for a ride?" Becky looked up at him, smiled, and nodded her head. Yes. Pete and Becky parted ways, and he watched her hurry to the front of the car. She opened the passenger door and climbed in. Pete quickly got behind the wheel. He shifted into low gear and they took off with a loud sound. When he turned onto the highway, he pressed the gas and the tires made a squeal. They squealed again when he changed to second gear. Becky glanced at him, smiled, and playfully made a gesture. Pete laughed and said, "I know, but I can't help it. This feels amazing." Pete and Becky drove around town. They stopped at his 3 best friends' homes to show off his new car, and even visited 2 of her close friends. It was nearly dark when they pulled into the local burger place for dinner. They took a long time to get inside because many people wanted to talk to them. Both of them were smiling so big it was almost too much to handle. They didn't leave the burger place until almost 10 p.m. They were both full of energy all the way back to Pete's house. After arriving, they stood in the driveway chatting for a while. Becky touched his arm and said, "Oh, Pete, I almost don't want this day to end. I really enjoyed working on the car. Now I'm not sure what to do with my spare time." Pete looked at Becky and smiled. He said, "Well, I guess we can do it all over again." "What? You don't mean you want to take it apart again and change more things, do you?" Pete laughed and said, "Not exactly, but you said you wanted to paint and upgrade your car. Now we have space in the shop to do that." He looked a little down and added, "Or do you not want to? I thought we could just work on it, but if you don't want to..." Becky smiled widely and interrupted him. She said, "No, I mean, yes, I want to. I just didn't think about doing my car here, too. When can we start? You know I start school again next week, and then the week after the students arrive. I will only have Saturdays to work on it." For the next 7 weeks, every Saturday, Pete and Becky worked on her old Malibu. She chose to do a modified restoration. She didn't plan to replace the brake or fuel lines unless they were broken, and she wanted to paint the frame rather than use a special coating. She still hadn't decided whether to redo the interior. Most of the planned work involved worn-out parts and a complete repaint. On Veterans Day, while Pete was working on some farm equipment, his phone rang. He didn't recognize the number, but it was from town. He answered and heard, "Daddy?" Sniffle, sniffle. "Daddy, can you come get me? I really need you." "Winona? Is that you, sweetheart? Where are you?" "I'm at a little bar downtown." "Downtown where, Winona?" "Where are you?" "I'm at Van Buren, Daddy. Please come get me. I'm really lost right now." "Is the lady behind the bar named Ginny?" Pete heard some noise in the background, and then Winona said, "Yes, Daddy, that's her name." "Okay, stay there. I'm on my way and should be there in about 10 minutes. Pete rushed to his truck and drove toward town. He wondered what was happening and why Winona had reached out to him after 3 years of distance between them. No matter how disappointed he felt, she was still his daughter, and she clearly needed help. When Pete arrived at the bar, he hurried inside. Ginny was speaking with a young woman who looked unwell and not well taken care of. They both turned to the door when Pete walked in. As he got closer, he recognized Winona. Her hair looked messy, and her clothes were worn out. This was not the same young woman he had seen a few years ago in St. Louis. Winona stood in front of him, trembling. Pete wasn't sure if she was scared, sick, or both. He heard her softly say, "Daddy?" Something shifted in Pete's heart. He opened his arms and welcomed Winona, now a 22-year-old woman. She ran to him and hugged him tightly, tears soaking his shirt. As Pete turned toward the door with Winona still in his arms, he said to Ginny, "Thanks for your help. I'll see you later." Pete stopped next to his truck and looked down at Winona. "Where are your bags, honey?" Winona looked up at him, then looked down shyly, holding out a small backpack before getting into the truck. During the ride home, Pete tried to talk to her, but she mostly gave short answers. Eventually, he gave up. When they got to the farm, Winona quietly followed him into the house. Pauline, his mother, called from the kitchen, "Where did you rush off to, Pete? You left in quite a hurry." She turned to see them and gasped, "Winona! Oh my God, what are you doing here? It's so good to see you." Winona burst into tears and stepped into her grandmother's arms, holding each other tightly for a while. Pauline glanced at Pete, raising her eyebrows. Pete sighed, shrugging his shoulders, unsure how to explain. Pauline smiled and said, "Never mind that now. Come on, sweetie. Let's get you cleaned up, and I'll finish dinner. You look worn out and hungry." Later that evening, after they had cleared away the dinner dishes, Winona began to share her story. She shamefully admitted she had dropped out of college and got back together with her old boyfriend. They had enjoyed a fun life, dancing and having a good time at the club with his small inheritance. He had a job at his father's company, but he lost it when she found out she was going to have a baby. They fought often, and during one argument, she ran out of their home, which led to her losing the baby. Their relationship fell apart after that. She moved back in with her mother, but they started to clash. Her mother felt disappointed in her for getting pregnant without marrying the father. They argued constantly during the year she stayed there. After her mother remarried, things got even tougher. Her stepfather was not kind, and Winona felt uncomfortable in the house. Eventually, Winona moved in with friends, but when she couldn't pay her share of the bills since she didn't have stable work, they asked her to leave. Cindy, her sister, and her sister's husband wouldn't let her return to their home. During Winona's absence, Cindy and her husband had taken a loan against their house to invest in something they thought was guaranteed to succeed. Unfortunately, that investment failed, and they lost their home. Cindy and her soon-to-be ex-husband moved into a low-cost apartment, and there was no room for Winona. Feeling hopeless, she decided to reach out to her father for help. Since she had no phone, it took her 3 days to hitchhike from St. Louis to Van Buren. Thankfully, Winona was welcomed into her grandparents' home. They made it clear that she needed to be respectful and help with chores. Over the next 3 weeks, the older family members noticed Winona's struggle to adjust to her new life. She had to do many tasks that she had once thought were beneath her. After changing her eating habits, her health got better. With the support of Pete and Winona, they finally caught up on farm work. Winona soon began to express her boredom. One day, Pete, feeling frustrated, said, "If you're so bored, go to town and find a job." Winona looked shocked for a moment and replied, "There's no job for someone like me in this small town. What can I do?" She sank into the couch, looked at Pete, and said, "I'm sorry, Daddy. That just slipped out. I realize now I'm not much, but I want to be something. I don't even know what I mean. Do you really think I can find a job here? I couldn't find one in St. Louis." Pete thought for a minute and decided to be honest with her. He said, "What you really mean is you couldn't find a fancy job that you and your friends thought was good enough. I'm sure you could find some work in St. Louis if you had looked in the right places." Louis. If you had not been so focused on appearances and status. Well, you take what you can get and feel grateful for it. You might have to do hard work or get your hands dirty, but I promise if you're willing to try, you can find a job, even if it is part-time. Winona was upset. She looked down and said, "I know, Daddy. You're right. If it wasn't a proper job, I wouldn't have even considered it before. I'll do better now, I promise." Pete gave her his truck keys and waved her toward the door. He then turned and headed to the shop. Winona went to the bathroom to clean up before starting her job search. On his way through the kitchen, Pete picked up his parents' car keys. He quickly drove into town and went to Jack's farm store and feed mill. When he arrived, Jack, looking quite busy, smiled and said, "Hey, what brings you here at this time?" "I'm trying to help my daughter. Do you still need someone in the mill during the day with school back in session?" "Definitely. The last person I hired was a mess, and Jimmy is back in school. Do you have someone in mind?" "Yes, maybe. But I want you to make her work hard before offering her the job. Winona has been bored and is on her way to find work. If she doesn't fit in, I don't want you to keep her. But I would appreciate you giving her a chance. She needs to learn about working and being responsible. Cindy didn't help her, and this might be my last chance to help her grow up and understand the value of hard work. I want her to see what it means to earn your pay." "Well, Pete, I don't need help in the store, as you know. She'll have to work in the back, lifting feed and cleaning. It's tough work with no comfort. Are you sure she can handle that?" "No, I'm not sure, but I know she needs to see what it's like to work hard despite the challenges. I'm not even sure she's up for it, but I hope so." "Okay, if she comes by, I'll give her a chance for you. But if she doesn't fit in, I'll have to let her go. I don't want this to hurt our friendship, Pete." "That's fine, I understand. I just ask for you to give her a shot. If needed, I can help with her pay until we see if she can handle it, but I want to try." The next day, Winona finally went to the farm center to look for work. On her first day of searching, she had applied at various places that might need office help or sales positions, the clean and more respected jobs. When that didn't work out, she finally decided to seek out the less desirable positions. True to his word, Jack was not eager to hire Winona. He made her plead for a chance, and then, with some hesitation, he seemed to agree. He said, "Well, I don't need anyone in the store or office right now. All I have is a job on the loading dock and in the feed mill. It's dirty work, and it gets really cold in winter and really hot in summer, Winona. It's tough physical work. I just don't think you can handle it. Honestly, most guys I hire struggle with it. No, I'm not sure." Winona's eyes sparkled with determination. She lifted her chin and replied, "That's not fair. It's against the law to discriminate in jobs. You have an opening, and I believe I can do it. You have to give me a chance. I really want this job, sir. I know I can manage. How hard can it be to lift some bags of feed?" Jack smiled and said, "All right, Missy. I'll give you a try, but don't come to me if you hurt yourself. You'll need heavy gloves and steel-toed boots. Wear sturdy jeans and a shirt, too, and make sure you're prepared." Winona felt her face get warm when Jack spoke like that. She almost snapped back at him for his tone, but quickly reminded herself of her situation. She gritted her teeth and said, "Thank you. When can I start?" "Oh, tomorrow should be fine if you have the boots and gloves. We sell both here if you need to get some." Winona's excitement faded as she said, "I don't have any money." I'll have to see if my dad can lend me some. Jack smiled and said, "Don't worry. You can buy them on credit if you sign a form allowing us to take the cost from your paycheck." Winona glared at Jack, then asked, "Okay, where do I sign?" For the next 3 weeks, Winona dragged herself out of bed for work. Her body ached constantly, her hands grew rough, and her nails were so damaged that she cut them as short as possible. Slowly, she learned the job and became stronger. One day, she realized she didn't hurt anymore. She looked at her stomach and noticed her muscles had developed. Her legs looked better toned than ever. She had spent a lot of money at a gym in St. Louis trying to achieve this, but had not succeeded. Winona began coming home in the evenings and talked about the people she met at the mill. She spoke about many of them with respect, though there were a few whom she didn't respect at all. Those were the ones who were rude to her. In most cases, Pete agreed with her opinions about the people she mentioned. One Friday afternoon, Winona rushed into the house and ran straight to her bedroom, then to the bathroom. They heard her shower running. In less than 30 minutes, she returned to the living room clean and dressed in her best jeans and shirt. Pete looked at her and smiled. "Big night planned?" Winona felt a blush rise and said, "I hope so. Bradley asked me to dinner, and then we're going to a dance. He was going to teach me something called the two-step." During this time, Pete and Becky were busy working on her car. It had become their Saturday routine. They would work on the car, then take a break around 3 or 3:30. Becky would go home to freshen up, and then she and Pete would go out for dinner and a movie or to dance. Some evenings, they stayed in Van Buren for burgers and visited the local bar. Other times, they went to the Bluff, and sometimes they just relaxed at Becky's house. Finally, Thanksgiving came. It was Pete's favorite holiday, and this year felt even better. Winona was back and seemed to be doing well. He had Becky in his life, and Randy was coming home for the holiday too. The day felt perfect to Pete. It was the first time in almost 10 years that his whole family was together. While visiting with the men in the living room, the women cleaned up after the big meal. Then he turned to greet them as they entered the room. A smile crossed his face when he saw them. He felt proud as he noticed Winona was growing into a wonderful young woman. He even liked her current boyfriend, who seemed much better than the shallow guys she used to date in St. Louis. Although he still cared about Jerrod, he knew that chapter was over. Bradley and Winona might struggle if they married since neither of them had a degree and would likely have to work hard in tough jobs. Still, at least they would be hardworking and contribute positively to society. Becky saw the thoughts on his face and walked across the room to sit comfortably in his lap, leaning against him with a contented sigh. Everyone enjoyed chatting and the warmth of the day. After a bit, Winona stood up and reached for Bradley's hand. He smiled and took it. Winona said, "I'm still so full. Bradley and I are going to take a walk to help with dinner before we have coffee and dessert." A few minutes after Winona left, Randy and his wife got up to take their walk too. Once they were gone, Pete thought it was a good time to take Becky for a walk as well. They stepped outside and quickly wrapped their arms around each other. They took a short stroll before heading into the shop to check on Becky's car. It was coming along nicely, and they felt proud of it, just like Pete was with his car. Interestingly, Becky's car was also a numbers-matching model and had been painted the same electric blue color as Pete's when it was new. They both thought they would look nice standing next to each other at car shows. While they were admiring the cars, Pete turned to Becky. He put his arms around her waist and gave her a soft kiss. After the kiss, he looked at her and said, "Becky, I decided not to have a woman in my life after my divorce and moving back home. You've changed my mind. I want more than what we have now. I want you with me all the time when you are not working. Will you marry me, please, Becky Potter?" Becky looked surprised for a moment, then smiled. She stood on her tiptoes and gave Pete a soft kiss, then said, "Yes, yes, Pete Youngblood, I will marry you. After I first met you at the car show, I thought I never wanted another man in my life after what Sherman did to me. You have changed my mind, too. I really want you in my life always." Pete smiled and reached into his pocket. He pulled out a ring and held it out to Becky. "This is a simple ring, but that's who I am. I like things simple and straightforward. I love you and this town, and this ring represents my love and commitment to you and to the simple life." If it doesn't feel right for you, we can find another one, Becky. Becky's eyes sparkled and she smiled. She held out her left hand and said, "No, honey, this ring is perfect. I would have been happy with no ring at all, but I appreciate what it stands for. I will wear it proudly for the rest of my life." She wrapped her arms around Pete again, and they shared a kiss. After a moment, they stepped out of the shed and walked back to the house. Becky was holding Pete's hand as she led him into the living room where the family was waiting. Becky looked back at Pete, then moved closer to him, wrapping her arm around his waist. She rested her head on his shoulder as he held her close. Pete smiled at his family and said, "Well, we have more to be thankful for today. Becky has agreed to be my wife. We are comfortable here in Van Buren, and that's where we plan to stay after we're married." Winona squealed and rushed over to Becky to see her ring. After the excitement died down, Pauline stood up and said, "Well, we need to celebrate. Let's have some port with our dessert and coffee tonight. Come on, everyone. Let's move to the kitchen." Pete and Becky decided to get married in early December. Since they had both been married before, they did not want a big wedding. They had a small gathering with family and a few friends. They planned to move into Becky's house, but Pete's parents had a different idea. They were getting older and didn't want to run the farm anymore. They suggested trading houses with Becky and living in her home in town. Pete and Becky lived happily on the farm and worked hard to make it thrive. Winona could stay with them until she and Bradley got married, which seemed like it would happen soon. Pete and Becky did well with her job, his yearly tax work, and the money from the farm. They shared some of the farm earnings with Pete's parents until they passed away, but they managed to get by just fine. They lost touch with Cindy. Sometimes Pete would ask her parents if they had seen her around town. Most of the time, they didn't know where she was or didn't want to say. They mentioned they hadn't seen her since Pete and Cindy divorced. They were sad that she had distanced herself from them, but were grateful to still see Winona and the kids now and then. They were very proud of Winona, and especially proud of Randy, who was now a lieutenant in the Navy with over 16 years of service. Life continued in their small town. There was always happiness and hard work to be found. Hey, everyone! Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss any of the exciting stories we have coming up. What do you think about the characters in this story? Let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear from you.